Long before swastikas cast their shadow across Europe, humanity dreamed of something impossible. Not conquest of land or sea or sky, but conquest of time itself. The dream begins in the dust of Mesopotamia, 5,000 years before Christ. Sumerian priests pressed reed styluses into wet clay, recording something extraordinary. Their tablets don't just catalogue grain harvests or tax collections. They describe gods, the Anunnaki, who moved through time as easily as we cross rivers. These weren't metaphors. The priests documented specific techniques, ritual preparations, astronomical alignments required to glimpse yesterday or tomorrow. The tablets exist. You can see them in museums across the world, their cuneiform text precisely translated. What you won't find in those museums is any explanation for why priests in different cities, separated by hundreds of miles, recorded identical temporal phenomena using different words but describing the same thing. Something else the records don't mention. Why the practice suddenly stopped. The last tablets describing temporal rituals date to roughly 4700 before Christ. Then nothing, as if someone or something closed a door that had been opened. Egypt inherited the dream, transformed it into architecture. The Great Pyramid at Giza weighs 6 million tons. It contains 2,300,000 stone blocks, some weighing 80 tons, transported from quarries hundreds of miles away. The mathematics encoded in its dimensions describe pi, phi, the speed of light, and the precise circumference of Earth. This from a civilization that officially possessed copper tools and wooden rollers. But here's what the tour guides don't tell you. The pyramid's internal chambers aren't tombs. No mummy has ever been found in the king's chamber. No hieroglyphs decorate its walls strange, since Egyptians covered everything with hieroglyphs. Instead, the chamber's dimensions create acoustic resonance at specific frequencies that affect human consciousness in measurable ways. The hieroglyphs that do exist, in older structures, describe Osiris as existing outside the stream of hours. Not metaphorically outside time, the texts are frustratingly literal. They describe Osiris judging souls simultaneously across every moment that ever was or would be. The priests didn't consider this supernatural. They considered it natural, if you understood the proper techniques. Those techniques involved the pyramid's interior shafts, aligned to specific stars during specific celestial configurations, combined with sound frequencies and consciousness-altering compounds extracted from blue lotus flowers. The texts describe preparation periods lasting months, learning to separate consciousness from temporal flow. What happened to these techniques? The records go silent after the 4th dynasty. The later dynasties built pyramids, but smaller, cruder, like children building sandcastles after watching master architects, as if they remembered that something important happened in pyramids but forgot what or how. The interruption feels deliberate. Across continents, in the Indus Valley, Hindu scholars wrote the Mahabharata around 1500 before Christ. Buried in its 18 books is the story of King Ravita. The king travels to Brahmaloka, heaven of the creator god Brahma, to ask a question. He waits for a musical performance to conclude perhaps an hour of his experience. When Brahma finally addresses him, the god smiles sadly. During that hour, 27 Mahayugas have passed on Earth. Each Mahayuga equals 4,320,000 years. The king returns to find everyone he knew dead for millions of years. Cities have risen and fallen, mountains have worn to dust. Western scholars call this mythology, but the text doesn't present it as mythology. It describes King Ravita's journey using the same matter-of-fact language it uses for describing battles and political intrigues. And it's not alone. The Surya Siddhanta, an astronomical text from roughly the same period, describes time as relative, flowing differently for different observers depending on their motion and gravitational environment. This is special relativity, described 3,500 years before Einstein. The same texts describe Vimanas, flying vehicles powered by something the texts call Mercury vortex engines. Detailed specifications survive. Diagrams show Mercury sealed in specific configurations, rotated at high speeds, generating forces the texts struggle to name. These aren't fantasies, they're engineering documents, complete with measurements and troubleshooting guides. In 1952, Indian scientists built a small-scale Vimana following the ancient texts. The Mercury engine rotated as specified. According to the researchers' published report, the device exhibited anomalous thrust characteristics not attributable to any known aerodynamic principle. The Indian government classified the full results. What else did the ancients know? And why did so much knowledge vanish? The Germanic and Norse peoples told stories around winter fires. Their myths described Odin, chief god, sacrificing himself on Yggdrasil, the world tree connecting 9 realms of reality. Odin hangs for 9 days and 9 nights, pierced by his own spear, neither eating nor drinking. At the moment between death and life, he achieves something the texts call rune wisdom, the ability to see all moments simultaneously. Past battles, future wars, every choice and consequence woven together like threads in a tapestry. The Norns, 3 women who sit at Yggdrasil's roots, weave this tapestry continuously. Their names mean what was, what is, and what must be. But the texts are careful to note, they weave what must be, not what will be, as if fate could be changed if you knew where to pull the threads. This wasn't just mythology to the Germanic peoples. It was practical knowledge. Runic inscriptions found across Scandinavia describe specific meditation techniques meant to induce what they called und sight, breath sight, or spirit sight. Warriors carved these runes into their weapons. Priests carved them into standing stones at specific locations where, the texts claim, the barrier between moments thins. Some of these stones still exist. Modern instruments detect magnetic anomalies around them, unusual electromagnetic fields that fluctuate in patterns that don't match any geological explanation. Local folklore warns against sleeping near the stones. You might wake up weeks later, confused about where the time went. Or you might not wake up at all. The Nazi SS would become obsessed with these stones. Heinrich Himmler sent expeditions to measure them, map them, decode them. He believed they were keys to temporal doorways. He might not have been entirely wrong. Medieval Europe transformed the dream into spiritual obsession. Alchemists worked in secret laboratories, their existence known but their work hidden. Nicolas Flamel, a real person, a Parisian scribe who lived from 1330 to 1418, recorded in his journals the moment he achieved the great work. After decades of research, he claims to have created the philosopher's stone. The stone wasn't about transmuting lead to gold. That was misdirection, a way to explain dangerous knowledge in safer terms. The stone was about transmuting time itself, reversing aging, granting immortality, but more importantly, allowing consciousness to move backward through moments already lived. Flamel described it as seeing one's life as God sees it, all at once, and choosing which moments to inhabit. Flamel lived for 88 years, unusually long for the 14th century. His wife Perinelle lived even longer. After Flamel's supposed death, witnesses reported seeing him in India in the 1500s, in Paris in the 1600s, barely aged. The reports were dismissed as folklore, until 2001, when renovations at a Paris church uncovered a hidden chamber containing journals in Flamel's handwriting, dated 1723, 300 years after his official death. The journals describe loneliness, the burden of watching everyone you love grow old and die while you remain, and above all, the terrible knowledge that you cannot change what you've seen. The past is written. You can visit it, but not alter it. The French government confiscated the journals. They remain classified. Churches across Europe housed holy relics, splinters of the true cross, bones of saints, vials of sanctified blood. Pilgrims travelled thousands of miles to touch these objects, believing contact would grant blessings or miracles. But read the medieval accounts carefully. Pilgrims weren't seeking magical healing. They were seeking temporal connection, direct contact with the moment when Christ lived, when saints performed their works. They believed these objects existed simultaneously in past and present, bridging centuries through sacred matter. This wasn't just faith. It was physics that wouldn't be formally described until Einstein. Matter and energy are interchangeable. space and time are intertwined. An object can, theoretically, maintain quantum connections across temporal distance. Medieval mystics understood this intuitively. Hildegard of Bingen, a Benedictine abbess in the 12th century, wrote detailed descriptions of visions where she perceived all time as a single moment, the beginning and end touching like a serpent consuming its tail. Her writings influenced medieval theology, but also medieval science. She described the universe as rotating spheres within spheres, anticipated plate tectonics by 700 years, and documented herbal medicines still used today. She also described what she called viriditas, a greening force, flowing through all living things, connecting past and future growth into a continuous present. Modern biologists reading her texts recognize descriptions of DNA, cellular communication, evolutionary patterns. How did a 12th century nun anticipate molecular biology? She claimed the knowledge came in visions, states of consciousness she achieved through specific breathing techniques and fasting rituals described in her medical texts. The techniques bear striking similarity to practices described in Hindu meditation manuals and Norse runic meditations. Convergence. Different cultures, different centuries, discovering the same doors to the same places. Leonardo da Vinci, born 1452, filled notebooks with designs for impossible machines. Everyone knows about his helicopter sketches, his parachute, his tank. What's less discussed are his temporal studies. In notebooks now scattered across European museums, Leonardo drew diagrams attempting to visualize time's nature. He sketched spirals within spirals, each representing a moment, all moments connected through geometric patterns he called the divine architecture. He wrote, "The painter who understands time can paint not what is, but what was and will be, all in a single image." His paintings demonstrate this. The Mona Lisa's enigmatic smile isn't mysterious because of what it shows. It's mysterious because it shows multiple expressions simultaneously. Look at her directly. She's somber. Look at her peripherally. She's smiling. Leonardo layered expressions from different moments into a single face, creating a temporal superposition that shouldn't be possible in paint. He knew it was possible because he'd seen it done before in ancient texts he studied obsessively. Leonardo's notebooks reference a Greek manuscript about Chronos devices built by priests of Apollo. The manuscript described mirrors that showed not reflections, but echoes images of viewers from moments before or after they stood before the glass. Leonardo attempted to build such a mirror. His notes describe experiments with mercury-backed glass in specific geometric configurations, combined with lodestone arrangements creating magnetic fields. The final notebook entry about these experiments simply reads, "I have seen, I dare not describe. I have destroyed the device lest others see what I saw." What did Leonardo see in his temporal mirror? The notebooks don't say. But after that entry, his art changed. His later works contain hidden symbols, mathematical codes, encoded messages scholars still debate, as if he was trying to warn future generations about something without stating it directly. As if he'd learned some truths require silence. Then came the machines. 1874, the first practical electric light. 1886, the gasoline engine. 1893, the diesel engine. Technology began compressing time messages, transmitted instantaneously by telegraph, journeys of weeks reduced to days by railroad, work of hours accomplished in minutes by factories. If machines could compress time, why couldn't machines reverse it? Herbert George Wells published The Time Machine in 1895. The novel presented time travel, not as magic or divine intervention, but as engineering gears and levers and crystal rods, manipulating the fourth dimension as easily as a locomotive manipulated distance. The novel became a sensation because it articulated what everyone was beginning to suspect. The laws of physics didn't prohibit time travel. They just hadn't yet discovered the mechanism. Wells himself believed this. In private letters discovered after his death, he described conversations with physicists who thought his fictional machine might actually work. The problem was energy generating enough power to warp spacetime required more than steam or electricity could provide. Unless, Wells's letters mention other energies that scientists were beginning to suspect existed, energies bound inside matter itself, energies that, if released, could power impossible things. He was describing nuclear fission 40 years before anyone split an atom. Across Europe, occult societies formed. The Golden Dawn in England, the Martinists in France, the Thule Society in Germany. Official histories call them mystical clubs for eccentric aristocrats. Read their documents more carefully, and different patterns emerge. These weren't mystical societies. They were research groups pooling knowledge from ancient texts, medieval manuscripts, Renaissance experiments. They sought practical techniques for manipulating consciousness, energy, time itself. Their rituals weren't religious, they were experimental protocols, repeated precisely to achieve reproducible results. Some of those results terrified them. In 1907, the Golden Dawn's inner circle abruptly disbanded after an experiment at their London headquarters. Official records claim personality conflicts, but private journals from members describe something else. During a ritual attempting to project consciousness backward, one member began speaking in a language no one recognized. Linguists later identified it as Proto-Indo-European, a reconstructed language never spoken by anyone alive. The woman speaking it wasn't a linguist. She was a seamstress who'd never studied ancient languages. Yet she spoke Proto-Indo-European fluently for 17 minutes, describing events from thousands of years past, before collapsing. She never recovered. She spent her remaining years in an asylum, occasionally lapsing into dead languages, describing cities that archaeology would only discover decades later. The Golden Dawn destroyed all records of the ritual. But one member preserved his journal, published posthumously in 1968. His final entry reads, "We opened something that cannot be closed. God help us all. The pieces were gathering. Ancient knowledge from Sumeria, Egypt, India, Germania, medieval experimentation, Renaissance discovery, modern physics, occult practice, all pointing toward the same impossible truth. Time wasn't what we thought it was. Consciousness wasn't what we thought it was. And the barrier between past, present, and future might be thinner than physics admitted." By the 1920s, multiple groups across Europe were actively researching temporal manipulation. Some were scientists working in universities. Others were occultists working in lodges. A few were both respected physicists who attended séances, engineers who studied Norse runes. Germany, defeated and humiliated after the Great War, became the center of this convergence. The Treaty of Versailles had forbidden conventional rearmament, so German minds turned to unconventional alternatives. In Munich beer halls and Berlin cafes, wounded veterans met with mystics who met with scientists. They shared a question. What if the ancients weren't telling stories? What if they were documenting real techniques that had been lost or hidden? And more urgently, what if those techniques could be recovered? One man in those meetings, a failed artist with disturbing charisma, absorbed everything. He believed in destiny, in mystical forces shaping history, in the superiority of the Aryan race, which he believed were descendants of an advanced civilization that had mastered time itself. His name was Adolf Hitler, and when he seized power in 1933, he would have resources beyond any previous seeker's imagining, a nation's industrial capacity, unlimited human test subjects, and absolute freedom from ethical constraints. The ancient dream of conquering time was about to become the 20th century's darkest experiment. But here's what the history books don't tell you. The experiments didn't begin with Hitler. They'd been running for decades in secret. Hitler simply removed the barriers, the caution, the conscience. He let researchers pursue questions that should never have been asked, and attempt procedures that should never have been tried. What they discovered in those laboratories, what they might have achieved, remains, 80 years later, classified at the highest levels. Perhaps because they discovered nothing, or perhaps because they discovered too much. Sleep now. Dream of ancient priests pressing reed into clay, describing gods who walked between moments. Dream of pyramids humming at frequencies that separate consciousness from time's flow. Dream of Leonardo's mirror, showing what it shouldn't show. And wonder, what if those dreams aren't dreams at all, but memories bleeding through from moments you haven't lived yet? What if the reason you sometimes wake knowing things you shouldn't know is because sleep itself is the time machine older than pyramids, simpler than any device, built into consciousness itself? The ancients knew, medieval mystics knew, Renaissance geniuses knew, the Nazis tried to weaponize what they knew, and the truth about whether they succeeded. That's a question for deeper darkness. For now, drift. Let time dissolve. Touch the eternal present where all moments exist at once. The past is ahead of you. The future is behind you. And right now, in this moment between waking and sleeping, you exist in all of them simultaneously, just like the gods, just like the ancients promised, just like, perhaps, the Nazis proved. The year 1895 changed everything. Herbert George Wells published The Time Machine, and suddenly time travel migrated from mystical speculation to scientific imagination. Wells's protagonist didn't pray or meditate into other eras, he built a device from metal and mathematics. The novel sparked obsession across Europe. If Jules Verne could accurately predict submarines and spacecraft, why not time machines? But fiction required foundation. 10 years later, in 1905, a patent clerk in Switzerland named Albert Einstein published papers that shattered reality's certainties. His special theory of relativity proved that time was not absolute, it bent, stretched, and slowed depending on velocity. Twin brothers, one traveling near light speed, one remaining on Earth, would age at different rates. Time was not humanity's master, but a dimension as manipulable as space. The implications were staggering. Einstein's equations predicted time dilation, verifiable, measurable, real. In 1971, scientists flew atomic clocks on commercial airplanes. The clocks ran slower than identical clocks on the ground, not by much mere nanoseconds, but measurably, undeniably slower. Time travel wasn't fantasy. It was physics. Other physicists pushed further into strange territory. In 1937, Kurt Gödel, Einstein's colleague at Princeton, discovered something disturbing within Einstein's own field equations: closed time-like curves. Mathematical structures allowing paths through spacetime that curved back to their own past. Not metaphorical paths, actual trajectories an object could follow to arrive at a moment before it departed. Einstein was reportedly disturbed by this implication of his own theory. The universe's fundamental laws permitted time travel. The equations didn't just allow it in certain solutions, they required it. But here's what the textbooks gloss over. Gödel didn't stumble upon these solutions accidentally. He was searching for them. His notebooks, now archived at Princeton, reveal he'd been studying Hindu texts about cyclical time, particularly the concept of eternal return. He was trying to prove mathematically what ancient philosophers had claimed, that time forms a circle, not a line. He succeeded. His rotating universe solution demonstrated that in certain space-time geometries, you could literally walk into your own past. The notebooks also reveal something else. Gödel suffered what doctors called nervous episodes while working on these proofs. He claimed to experience temporal disorientation moments where past and present seemed to overlap. His wife found him once, early morning, insisting that yesterday hadn't happened yet. After completing the proofs, Gödel became obsessed with the idea that someone or something was manipulating time, editing history, and that most people simply didn't notice the changes. He died convinced of this, paranoid and isolated, having stopped eating because he believed someone was trying to poison him across multiple timelines. Madness? Or had Gödel's mathematical journey into temporal loops done something to his perception of reality? Meanwhile, quantum mechanics revealed that reality's foundations were stranger than any mysticism. Werner Heisenberg's uncertainty principle, formulated in 1927, suggested that observation itself changed reality. The act of measuring a particle's position affected its momentum. The universe didn't exist in definite states until someone looked. This wasn't philosophy. It was experimental fact, demonstrated thousands of times in laboratories worldwide. But the implications were unsettling. If consciousness affects reality at the quantum level, what else might consciousness affect? Could observation influence not just particles but time itself? Some physicists thought so. John von Neumann, the polymath who helped develop quantum mechanics, wrote privately about consciousness being the boundary where quantum possibilities collapsed into definite realities. He speculated that sufficiently focused consciousness might be able to influence which possibilities became real, not just in space, but in time. Von Neumann never published these speculations, but German physicists read his private correspondence. They understood the implication. Consciousness might be a tool for manipulating temporal reality. During World War II, von Neumann would work on the Manhattan Project. But he'd also consult on other, stranger projects involving electromagnetic fields and human consciousness, projects whose records remain classified. The Great War of 1914 through 1918 introduced mechanized death on an industrial scale. Machine guns killed thousands in minutes. Poison gas turned lungs into bleeding sponges. Tanks crushed trenches and men alike. Artillery shells obliterated entire battalions. In 4 years, 20 million people died. Science had multiplied humanity's power to destroy. Why not power to transcend? Germany's defeat in 1918 created special conditions. The Treaty of Versailles imposed crushing reparations, 132 billion gold marks, equivalent to roughly $450 billion today. The treaty stripped away 13% of German territory. It limited military forces to 100,000 men, no tanks, no aircraft, no submarines. German officers returned home in humiliation. The army that had nearly conquered Europe was now forbidden to exist. Proud military men found themselves unemployed, their skills obsolete, their honor destroyed. But conventional rearmament was forbidden, so German thought turned elsewhere toward technologies that might leapfrog enemies entirely. Why rebuild a traditional army when you could build something that made traditional armies irrelevant? The logic was cold and clear. Germany couldn't win another conventional war. But if German science could achieve breakthrough technologies, if they could build weapons that bent physical laws, then the next war would be different. In Munich beer halls and Berlin cafes, a strange synthesis emerged. The Thule Society, founded in 1918 by Rudolf von Sebottendorf, combined German nationalism with occult mysticism. They weren't harmless eccentrics. They were influential aristocrats, military officers, industrialists. They studied ancient Norse runes, practiced meditation techniques, collected manuscripts about lost civilizations. Their core belief, Germans, descended from an Atlantean super-race called Hyperboreans. These beings supposedly possessed vril, a mysterious energy described in Edward Bulwer-Lytton's 1871 novel, The Coming Race. Vril granted control over matter, mind, and time itself. Modern readers assume the Thule Society treated Bulwer-Lytton's novel as fiction. They didn't. They believed it was revelation disguised as fiction, that Bulwer-Lytton had accessed genuine occult knowledge and published it as a novel to avoid persecution. Why? Because similar concepts appeared in ancient Hindu texts, Tibetan manuscripts, Egyptian hieroglyphs. The name changed vril, prana, ka, chi. But the concept remained consistent across cultures and centuries, an energy pervading reality that could be harnessed by those who knew the techniques. The Thule Society sought those techniques. The Vril Society emerged from Thule, taking the obsession further. They claimed mediums channeled communications from advanced beings on Aldebaran, 65 light-years from Earth, who had mastered space-time manipulation. These weren't dismissed as lunatics. The Vril Society attracted engineers, scientists, future Nazi leaders. One medium, Maria Orsic, supposedly channeled technical specifications for unusual aircraft powered by electromagnetic vortexes. Her sketches showed disc-shaped craft with counter-rotating components, mercury-based propulsion systems, and something the transmissions called temporal displacement capability. In 1922, the Vril Society allegedly built a prototype called the Gensites machine, the otherworld flight machine. Reports describe a disc 8 meters in diameter that glowed when powered. During a test, witnesses claimed the device vanished for several minutes before reappearing. The pilot emerged disoriented, insisting that no time had passed, though everyone else had waited anxiously. The device was dismantled, the records were hidden, but the scientists involved remembered what they'd seen. When Hitler came to power, some of those scientists would be recruited for projects with similar goals, projects involving rotation, electromagnetic fields, and mercury, projects that would kill dozens of researchers and prisoners in pursuit of something the SS called temporal advantage. In Weimar, Germany's chaos, hyperinflation, making money worthless, political violence in streets, old certainties destroyed, people sought alternative realities. Between 1921 and 1923, German currency collapsed. In 1921, $1 bought 64 marks. By November 1923, $1 bought 4 trillion marks. Life savings became worthless overnight. A loaf of bread cost billions. Economic reality had become surreal. Why not seek refuge in other surrealities? Occult books sold remarkably well despite the inflation. Bookstores in Berlin stocked titles about Atlantis, ancient Aryan civilizations, mystical technologies. Lecture halls filled with audiences eager to hear about ancestral wisdom, lost sciences, and the possibility that material reality was illusion. This wasn't mass delusion. It was mass trauma seeking explanation. The world had broken economically, politically, socially. If reality could break that completely, perhaps it wasn't as solid as everyone had believed. Perhaps there were other realities, better realities, accessible through the right knowledge. A failed artist named Adolf Hitler attended Thule Society meetings. Born 1889 in Austria, Hitler had dreamed of becoming a painter. He'd been rejected by the Vienna Academy of Fine Arts twice. He'd drifted through Vienna as a homeless artist, selling postcards, nursing resentments. Then came the Great War. Hitler served as a dispatch runner, was wounded, received the Iron Cross. The war gave him purpose, belonging, identity. When Germany surrendered, Hitler experienced it as personal betrayal. In Munich after the war, seeking purpose again, he discovered the German Workers' Party, a tiny group meeting in beer halls, mixing nationalism with occult beliefs absorbed from the Thule Society. Hitler attended a meeting in September 1919. Within months, he dominated the group. What attracted Hitler wasn't just the nationalism, it was the mysticism. Hitler absorbed the Thule mythology. Aryans as descendants of Atlantean god-men, racial destiny, ancient technologies waiting to be rediscovered. These beliefs resonated with Hitler's own intuitions about destiny and his belief that will could overcome material reality. By 1920, Hitler had renamed the group the National Socialist German Workers' Party, the Nazi Party. When it seized power in 1933, it carried occult beliefs into its foundation. This wasn't incidental. Nazism was always both a political movement and a mystical cult. The two couldn't be separated. The Holocaust wasn't just genocide, it was human sacrifice on an industrial scale, driven by mystical beliefs about racial purity and cosmic destiny. And the secret projects? They weren't just weapons research. They were attempts to access what Hitler believed were Aryan birthrights, control over matter, energy, consciousness, and time. Heinrich Himmler embodied the fusion of mysticism and murder. Born in 1890, Himmler studied agronomy but obsessed over German mythology. Short, physically unimpressive, bad eyesight Himmler compensated with fanatical belief. He believed absolutely in Aryan mystical destiny, in German descent from Atlantean god-men, in reincarnation. Himmler claimed to be the reincarnation of Heinrich I, King of Germany in the 10th century. He visited Heinrich's tomb regularly, communing with his past self. He wasn't performing theatre, he genuinely believed it. When Hitler made him Reichsführer SS in 1929, Himmler began transforming the SS from Hitler's bodyguards into something unprecedented. Not just a military force, but a mystical order, like the Teutonic Knights, combining modern weaponry with ancient ritual. SS officers weren't just soldiers, they were initiates in a cosmic struggle, instruments of destiny, inheritors of ancestral wisdom. They studied runes, practiced meditation, underwent breeding selection. The SS Race and Settlement Main Office enforced programs treating humans as livestock, selecting racially pure Germans for reproduction while sterilizing the unfit. This wasn't madness. It was systematic application of mystical beliefs about race and time. Himmler believed Aryans were becoming diluted through interbreeding, losing ancestral abilities, including, and this is documented in SS archives, temporal perception. Pure Aryans, Himmler believed, could perceive multiple timelines simultaneously, choosing optimal futures. The SS's ultimate goal wasn't just German military victory. It was racial evolution toward godhood. And if that required experimenting on prisoners to rediscover lost Aryan abilities, Himmler considered that justified. By the 1930s, the pieces were aligning. Physics had proven time was manipulable. Quantum mechanics suggested consciousness affected reality. Ancient texts described techniques for temporal manipulation. Occult societies claimed to have achieved partial successes, and Germany now had a government that believed in mystical destiny and possessed no ethical constraints. The Treaty of Versailles had forbidden conventional rearmament. Fine. German scientists would pursue unconventional alternatives, not just better tanks or planes, but technologies that transcended conventional warfare entirely. Werner Heisenberg remained in Germany, leading uranium research despite his hatred of Lotte, the Nazi regime. Why? Because the research was fascinating. Because he believed Germany would use it defensively. Because, perhaps, he was curious whether certain theories about consciousness and quantum states were correct. Other physicists, engineers, and specialists were recruited quietly. Many were Nazi true believers. Others simply found the research irresistible. A few perhaps recognized the horror but felt trapped. They gathered in universities, in industrial laboratories, and increasingly in SS facilities where security was absolute and oversight was absent. They studied ancient texts alongside modern physics. They built devices combining cutting-edge engineering with mystical design principles, and they experimented on human subjects, prisoners who wouldn't be missed, whose deaths wouldn't be investigated, whose experiences wouldn't be believed even if they survived to report them. The ancient dream of conquering time was transforming into the 20th century's darkest science. The mystical was becoming industrial. The impossible was becoming, perhaps, achievable. But here's what the history books omit. Similar research was happening elsewhere. In England, Winston Churchill authorized investigations into psychical warfare based on reports about German occult research. British intelligence recruited mediums and mystics, testing whether consciousness could be weaponized. In America, private foundations funded research into time perception, altered states of consciousness, and electromagnetic effects on human psychology. These weren't fringe projects. They received funding from respected institutions, involved credentialed scientists, and produced classified reports that remain sealed. The Soviets pursued their own programs, believing dialectical materialism could explain and exploit consciousness's role in physical reality. Stalin, the brutal pragmatist, authorized research into psychotronics, time perception manipulation, and what they called energoinformatics. Everyone was searching for the same thing: ways to transcend physical limitations, gain strategic advantages, access powers that myths and legends suggested once existed. Germany simply pursued it with unique fanaticism, unlimited resources, and absolute ruthlessness. While other nations experimented cautiously, Germany built underground facilities, staffed them with prisoner labor, and pushed toward breakthrough regardless of cost. The difference wasn't that Germany believed in time travel and others didn't. The difference was that Germany was willing to kill thousands to achieve it. And in the mountains of Poland and Czechoslovakia, in laboratories hidden from Allied bombers, German scientists were beginning to achieve results that defied conventional explanation, results that produced purple light, temporal disorientation, and rapid organic decay, results that suggested, impossibly, that the ancient myths might be true, results that, 80 years later, remain classified at the highest levels, not because they failed, but perhaps because they succeeded in ways that changed everything. Sleep approaches. The boundary between waking and dreaming thins. In this liminal state, time dissolves. Past, present, and future blur together. The physicists proved time was relative. The mystics claimed it was illusion. The Nazis tried to weaponize both truths. As consciousness fades towards sleep, consider, what if Einstein and Himmler were both right? What if time truly is manipulable, and consciousness truly is the key? What if the reason you sometimes dream of places you've never been and times you've never lived is because sleep temporarily frees consciousness from temporal flow, just as the ancient priests claimed, just as medieval mystics experienced, just as Nazi scientists tried to induce artificially? What if the experiments succeeded not in building time machines, but in proving that consciousness itself is the time machine? Dream now of Berlin cafes, where veterans discussed destiny with mystics. Dream of Himmler reading ancient texts, imagining himself a god. Dream of laboratories hidden in mountains, where prisoners died to prove theories about time. And wonder, are these dreams, or memories from timelines that haven't happened yet? The Nazis believed in destiny, in fate. In cyclical time, where everything that happened would happen again, endlessly, unless someone broke the cycle. What if they found a way to break it? What if that's what they're still hiding? January 30th, 1933. Adolf Hitler became Chancellor of Germany. What followed wasn't merely dictatorship, it was the transformation of an entire society into something resembling collective psychosis, a nation that agreed to inhabit fantasy reality, where races had mystical properties, ancient Aryans possessed super technology, and will could overcome physical laws. Within weeks, the Reichstag burned. Hitler blamed communists, suspended civil liberties, arrested political enemies. By March, the Enabling Act granted him dictatorial powers. Democracy ended not with gunfire but with parliamentary votes and legal procedures. The speed of transformation was remarkable. By year's end, Germany had outlawed opposition parties, begun boycotting Jewish businesses, and established Dachau, the first concentration camp. But the political changes, as horrifying as they were, masked something stranger happening beneath the surface. The Nazi state wasn't just authoritarian, it was theological, a government run according to mystical principles, pursuing goals that mixed military conquest with cosmic destiny. Himmler expanded the SS from under 300 members to over 250,000 by 1939. But numbers tell nothing. What mattered was the transformation of purpose. The SS became a state within the state, answering only to Hitler through Himmler. They controlled concentration camps. They ran intelligence services. They supervised racial programs. And they funded research projects so classified that even other Nazi leaders didn't know details. Within the SS, Himmler created an inner order, initiated members who studied runic magic, practiced meditation, and believed themselves inheritors of Atlantean wisdom. These men weren't play-acting medieval knights. They genuinely believed they were warriors in a cosmic struggle that transcended mere politics. SS training included not just military skills but ideological indoctrination. Officers studied racial theory, ancient history according to Nazi mythology, and what Himmler called ancestral memory techniques, meditation practices meant to access knowledge from past lives. The SS taught that pure Aryans could remember previous incarnations, accessing accumulated wisdom across lifetimes. This wasn't optional mysticism for interested officers. It was mandatory curriculum. SS personnel who dismissed it as nonsense faced removal. Himmler wanted true believers who would pursue any goal, commit any act, because they believed absolutely in their cosmic destiny. In 1935, Himmler acquired Wewelsburg Castle in Westphalia. A Renaissance structure on a hilltop, triangular in shape, imposing but unremarkable. Himmler transformed it into the SS spiritual center, what he called the center of the world. He renovated rooms to resemble Camelot's Round Table. The North Tower's main hall featured a massive oak table where 12 senior SS leaders would gather as modern Grail knights. The symbolism was explicit. These men were heirs to both the Teutonic Knights and King Arthur's court, a fusion of Germanic and Arthurian mythologies. Directly below this hall, Himmler installed a crypt, circular chamber, stone walls, a pit in the center. What happened in this crypt remains debated. Historians know SS officers conducted ceremonies there, rituals involving fire, oaths, possibly human remains. But the specific nature of these rituals? The documents were destroyed. Local workers who helped construct the crypt reported unusual requirements. The chamber's dimensions followed precise specifications from Norse mythology. The stones were arranged in patterns matching runic symbols. Channels in the floor suggested something was meant to flow blood, perhaps, or other liquids. One worker, interviewed decades later, described an incident during construction. The crew hit an older foundation beneath the Renaissance structure remains from a medieval fortress. In the rubble, they found carved stones with symbols no one recognized. Himmler, visiting the site, became intensely interested. He ordered the stones photographed, measured, and then sealed behind new walls. What were those symbols? The photographs were archived in SS files that disappeared at war's end. But here's what we know. After Wewelsburg's crypt was completed, Himmler spent hours alone there, meditating. He claimed to commune with ancient spirits, seeking guidance about coming battles. Guards reported hearing him speaking in languages they didn't recognize, possibly ancient Germanic dialects, possibly something else. This wasn't theater. Himmler genuinely believed the crypt was a power center, a location where the barrier between past and present thinned, where one could access ancestral knowledge, and he planned to expand it. Architectural plans showed Wewelsburg as merely the center of a massive complex spreading for miles, a city dedicated to SS mysticism, housing tens of thousands, with underground facilities for research into. The documents use the phrase temporal cultivation. The war prevented this expansion, but the intention reveals the Nazi ambition: build a permanent center for accessing and manipulating time itself. That same year, 1935, Himmler founded the Ahnenerbe. The full name, Studiengesellschaft für Geistesurgeschichte, Deutsches Ahnenerbe Study Society for Primordial Intellectual History, German Ancestral Heritage. Officially, it was an archaeological research institute. Actually, it was a global operation seeking evidence for Nazi mythology and hunting ancient Aryan technologies. The Ahnenerbe received substantial funding, millions of Reichsmarks annually. It employed hundreds of researchers, archaeologists, anthropologists, linguists, historians, but also occultists, dowsers, and self-proclaimed mystics. The line between legitimate scholarship and fantasy was deliberately blurred. Their expeditions ranged worldwide. In 1938, zoologist Ernst Schaefer led a team to Tibet. Official purpose: study Tibetan wildlife and culture. Actual purpose: prove that Tibetans descended from Aryan refugees fleeing Atlantis's destruction and recover whatever ancient knowledge Tibetan monasteries preserved. Schaefer's team measured Tibetan skulls, collected artifacts, and spent months at remote monasteries. What they sought, according to expedition journals later recovered, was knowledge about inner time, meditation techniques, allowing consciousness to move backward through personal history, reliving and potentially altering past decisions. Did they find such techniques? Schaefer returned to Germany with extensive documentation, crates of artifacts, and several Tibetan texts. The texts were translated by SS scholars and archived. During the war's final days, most Ahnenerbe archives were destroyed, but fragments survived, later recovered by Allied intelligence. One fragment describes a Tibetan practice called bardo navigation, training consciousness to remain aware during the transition between lives, allowing deliberate choice of when and where to reincarnate. The fragment notes, if perfected, this technique grants effective backward temporal travel through controlled reincarnation, accessing any moment in human history by choosing to be reborn there. The SS took this seriously. They attempted to develop training protocols based on Tibetan techniques combined with modern psychology and pharmacology. Whether they achieved results remains classified. Other Ahnenerbe expeditions searched for Atlantis in Bolivia, investigated rune sites in Scandinavia, and explored Antarctica's ice. Antarctica particularly interested Himmler. Why? Admiral Karl Dönitz, commander of Germany's submarine fleet, told his officers Antarctica was an invulnerable fortress. Strange statement about a frozen wasteland. But Norwegian whalers reported finding ice-free regions with temperate lakes anomalies in a landscape that should be uniformly frozen. German expeditions in 1938 and 39 conducted extensive Antarctic mapping, claiming a region they named Neuschwabenland New Swabia. Official purpose: establish territorial claims. But the expedition's composition was unusual. Along with cartographers and geologists came SS officers, physicists, and specialists in electromagnetic measurement. They weren't just mapping terrain, they were searching for something. Expedition reports, partially declassified in the 1990s, mention magnetic anomalies of extreme magnitude in certain Antarctic regions. The reports describe compass needles spinning wildly, radio equipment malfunctioning, and crew members experiencing temporal disorientation, losing track of time, experiencing déjà vu, reporting dreams of ancient civilizations beneath the ice. One report, heavily redacted, describes discovering entrance to underground caverns warmed by geothermal vents. The exploration party went inside, descended for hours, found carved walls with symbols matching no known human civilization. At the deepest point, they encountered a chamber with the text is redacted. Whatever they found, it was significant enough that SS leadership ordered construction of a permanent base nearby. Did they build that base? U-boat traffic to Antarctic waters increased substantially between 1939 and 1941, before the war consumed resources. Where did those submarines go? What did they transport? Meanwhile, German physics advanced rapidly under Nazi patronage. Werner Heisenberg led uranium research. Otto Hahn split the atom in 1938, discovering nuclear fission. Germany possessed the knowledge to build atomic weapons. Why didn't they? The common explanation: Hitler dismissed nuclear physics as Jewish science, and the program never received adequate resources. But this explanation is incomplete. Germany did pursue nuclear research extensively. They built reactors, enriched uranium, studied bomb designs. They simply didn't build functional weapons before war's end. Some researchers suggest a different explanation. Resources that might have funded nuclear weapons were diverted to even more exotic projects. Projects involving electromagnetic manipulation, consciousness alteration, and temporal displacement. Victor Schauberger, Austrian inventor obsessed with implosion rather than explosion, was recruited by the SS. Schauberger believed conventional physics had it backward. Nature operates through spiraling implosion, not linear explosion. Water's natural flow creates energy through vortexes. Apply this principle to engineering, and you could generate tremendous power from minimal input. The SS was particularly interested in Schauberger's claims about anti-gravity. His designs for flying discs, powered by imploding water vortexes, supposedly achieved levitation through manipulating gravity itself. During the war, Schauberger worked at the Mauthausen concentration camp, using prisoner labor to build prototypes. Did the prototypes work? Schauberger claimed after the war that Americans confiscated his research and forced him to sign away his knowledge. He died in 1958, days after returning to Austria from Texas, where he'd been working for American interests. Before dying, he told his son, "They took everything we worked for." What did they take? Schauberger's papers were confiscated. Most have never been declassified. Walter Gerlach, another physicist recruited by the SS, worked on electromagnetic field research. Official focus: developing degaussing technology to protect German ships from magnetic mines. But Gerlach's personal notes reveal wider interests. He studied biological effects of electromagnetic fields, consciousness alteration through magnetic stimulation, and something he called temporal field generation. Gerlach's notes reference meetings with SS General Hans Kammler and visits to facilities in Lower Silesia. The notes are frustratingly vague, lots of technical jargon about field configurations and rotating mercury cylinders, but no clear description of what they were building. After the war, Gerlach refused to discuss his SS work. When pressed by Allied interrogators, he claimed to have forgotten. When researchers approached him decades later, he insisted, "Some knowledge should stay buried." What knowledge? What did Gerlach see in those Silesian facilities? The SS controlled concentration camps, providing unlimited human subjects for experimentation. Everyone knows about Joseph Mengelé's horrific medical experiments at Auschwitz. Fewer know about the prisoners who disappeared into different facilities, camps within camps, special sections with unusual security. In 1943, the SS transferred prisoners with physics and engineering backgrounds from multiple camps to locations in Silesia and Czechoslovakia. These weren't labor transfers. The prisoners were educated specialists, physicists, mathematicians, engineers. Why? Official records label these transfers cryptically: special projects, technical consultation, research assistance. Some prisoners survived to testify after the war. They described working in underground, facilities on equipment they couldn't identify, large rotating devices, chambers lined with unusual ceramics, machinery that hummed at frequencies that made your bones vibrate. One survivor, a Polish physicist named Jan Kowalski, pseudonym used in his testimony, described working on what guards called the Bell Project. He saw a device 9 feet wide, 12 feet tall, bell-shaped, counter-rotating cylinders filled with glowing purple liquid. When activated, the device emitted light and sound that caused nausea, disorientation, bleeding. Kowalski's job was mathematical calculating field equations for specific rotational velocities. He didn't understand the device's purpose, but he remembered the effects. Plants brought near the device withered within hours, turning grey and crumbling. Animals died. Researchers working too close hemorrhaged internally. 5 prisoners worked on the project with Kowalski. 4 died within weeks from exposure. Kowalski survived because the SS transferred him before fatal exposure occurred. Why did they transfer him? He suspects, because he'd learned too much. The SS preferred to kill witnesses, but educated prisoners were valuable. Transfer to a different project, no contact with previous work, kept knowledge fragmented. Kowalski's testimony, given to Allied investigators in 1946, was classified. It remained classified until 2005, 59 years. When finally released, most technical details were redacted. Why classify prisoner testimony for 6 decades? Wernher von Braun's rocket program received massive resources. The underground Mittelwerk factory at Mittelbau-Dora used 20,000 slave laborers to build V-2 rockets. Conditions were horrific. Prisoners worked until dead, then were replaced. Over 20,000 prisoners died, building rockets that killed approximately 9,000 people in London and Antwerp. But rockets were visible projects, public, known to Allied intelligence. The V-2's existence couldn't be hidden. It flew high, left contrails, crashed loudly. Other projects proceeded invisibly, in deeper bunkers, with tighter security. These projects had codenames whispered in SS circles, but never written in official documents: Laternenträger, lantern bearer; Kronos, Torgate; and most mysterious, Die Glock, the bell. Who oversaw these projects? SS General Hans Kammler. Kammler embodied Nazi efficiency's horror. An engineer by training, educated at Munich Technical University, Kammler joined the SS in 1933. His competence impressed Himmler. Kammler designed concentration camp infrastructure, crematoria, gas chambers, barracks, treating mass murder as an engineering optimization problem. How to kill the maximum number of people using minimum resources. His solutions were efficient. At Auschwitz-Birkenau, Kammler's crematoria could process 4,400 bodies daily. This wasn't evil genius, it was bureaucratic evil, reducing horror to spreadsheets and blueprints. Such competence earned rewards. Kammler rose rapidly, eventually controlling all SS construction projects and, secretly, special weapons development. By 1944, he oversaw the V-2 program, jet aircraft development, and the classified projects. What made Kammler valuable wasn't just technical skill, it was his willingness to do anything. No ethical constraints, no hesitation, absolute loyalty to results. If a project required killing hundreds of prisoners to gather data, Kammler arranged it. If success required resources that might save German cities instead, Kammler diverted resources. By 1945, Kammler controlled Germany's last hopes, the wonder weapons Hitler believed would reverse defeat, and Kammler's highest priority, consuming resources even as the Reich collapsed. The classified projects in Silesia. What was in those mountains that mattered more than defending Berlin? Reports filtered through resistance networks to Allied intelligence. Polish underground agents risked execution photographing facilities near the Czech border. Their reports described the Wenceslas mine complex near Ludwikowice, extensive underground construction, massive power lines, unusual security. Workers conscripted to build the complex reported strange requirements, chambers lined with ceramics designed to withstand extreme heat and electromagnetic stress, foundations for heavy machinery that rotated. Workers could see the mounting designs, but the machinery itself was assembled elsewhere and installed secretly. Construction used concentration camp labor. Prisoners worked until they collapsed, then were replaced. No one who worked on the project's inner chambers survived to describe them. The SS executed all prisoners with direct knowledge before facilities became operational. But details leaked anyway. Guards talked. Distant witnesses noticed lights, heard sounds, experienced effects. By 1944, local Polish residents near the Wenceslas mine reported bizarre phenomena: purple and green lights underground, visible through ventilation shafts, low-frequency humming that rattled windows miles away. Animals avoiding the region, birds stopped singing, deer disappeared. Plants within a kilometre of the mine entrance began dying, leaves turning crystalline grey. Allied intelligence received these reports. They struggled to interpret them. Were the Nazis building superweapons, testing radioactive materials, attempting something beyond known physics? By late 1944, both British and American intelligence concluded whatever was happening in Silesia was significant enough to warrant bombing campaigns specifically targeting the region. Multiple air raids attempted to destroy the facilities. The raids failed. The facilities were too deep underground, too well protected. Bombs collapsed surface structures but left the underground complexes intact. Whatever the Nazis were building in those mountains, they completed it despite Allied efforts to stop them. The darkness rising over Europe wasn't just political or military, it was epistemological, a complete abandonment of empirical reality in favor of mystical certainty, a society where SS officers meditated on runes before ordering massacres, where concentration camp data was analyzed alongside astrology charts, where the same scientists building rockets consulted the spear of destiny for inspiration. This wasn't madness. It was method. The Nazis genuinely believed that Aryan superiority included mystical abilities, that ancient technologies could be recovered, that will and destiny mattered more than physical constraints. And in underground facilities where prisoners died by the hundreds to test impossible theories, German scientists pursued time itself. Whether they achieved anything beyond horror and death remains history's most classified question. But here's what we know. The resources devoted to these projects were enormous. The secrecy surrounding them was absolute. The locations were chosen for specific properties: electromagnetic anomalies, proximity to ancient sites, geological features. And when the war ended, when Allied forces reached those facilities, they found ruins and bodies but incomplete records. The Germans had destroyed evidence systematically, evacuating key personnel and materials. Where did they go? What did they take? Those questions lead to darker places than battlefields ever reached. Sleep comes closer now. The boundary between waking and dreaming dissolves. In sleep, time becomes fluid. You dream of moments that haven't occurred yet. You remember things that never happened. Past and future blend. The Nazis believed Aryans possessed this ability naturally, that pure bloodlines maintained connection to ancestral time, perceiving multiple possibilities simultaneously. They built facilities to amplify this ability. They experimented on prisoners to understand its mechanisms. They consulted ancient texts describing how to navigate temporal streams. Did they succeed? The facilities were destroyed. The records were burned. The witnesses were executed. But the classification persists. 80 years later, documents remain sealed. Requests are denied. Questions are deflected. Perhaps because there's nothing to hide, just bureaucratic inertia, embarrassment about recruited Nazi scientists, reluctance to admit how much we don't know. Or perhaps because there's everything to hide. Perhaps because in those mountains, in those laboratories, German scientists achieved something. Not time travel, as science fiction imagines it, no machines carrying people to different eras, but something: temporal viewing, consciousness displacement, manipulation of causality at quantum scales, something that changed the war's outcome in ways we don't discuss, something that continues, in bunkers beneath Nevada or the Antarctic ice, because the knowledge proved too valuable to abandon despite its horrific origins. Dream of Wewelsburg's crypt, where Himmler communed with ancestors. Dream of Tibetan monasteries, where monks taught techniques for navigating between lives. Dream of Antarctic caverns, warmed by Earth's heat, hiding ruins from civilizations before history began. And wonder, are these dreams? Or are you remembering research notes from projects that officially never existed, accessed through consciousness techniques the Nazis proved actually work? The line between sleep and waking thins. On the other side lies the secret war battles fought not with bullets, but with consciousness itself. While armies clashed at Stalingrad and Normandy, another war raged in shadows, a conflict of intelligence, sabotage, and esoteric research, where the weapons were knowledge and the stakes were reality itself. Allied intelligence first dismissed reports about Nazi occultism as propaganda or distraction. Rational military minds couldn't accept that a modern industrial power was pursuing mystical weapons. The reports seemed too absurd to be genuine. Then came Rudolf Hess, May 10, 1941. Rudolf Hess, Hitler's deputy, third most powerful man in Germany, flew solo to Scotland in a Messerschmitt fighter. He parachuted into a field near Glasgow, hoping to negotiate peace with Britain. The mission failed spectacularly. The British imprisoned Hess. Churchill refused negotiations. The Nazis claimed Hess was insane, but British interrogators discovered something unsettling. Hess wasn't insane. He was something stranger. He genuinely believed cosmic forces guided history. He'd consulted astrologers about the timing of his flight. He spoke earnestly about prophecies, planetary alignments, and Germany's mystical destiny. The interrogators reported back. Nazi leadership's occult beliefs weren't propaganda. They were sincere. Hitler's inner circle genuinely operated according to mystical principles. This changed Allied assessment dramatically. If Nazi leaders actually believed in occult forces, they might pursue projects that seemed irrational but were within their worldview perfectly logical. Projects involving ancient artifacts, electromagnetic manipulation of consciousness, temporal displacement. Suddenly, the strange reports from occupied territories seemed less dismissible. The Manhattan Project consumed Allied scientific resources. Building an atomic bomb was straightforward physics theoretically possible, practically challenging, but achievable through engineering and resources. By 1943, the project employed over 100,000 people at facilities across America. But Manhattan Project security teams worried about more than just preventing espionage. They monitored German atomic progress, naturally, but they also tracked stranger German research. In 1943, physicist J. Robert Oppenheimer received intelligence briefings about German electromagnetic research. The reports described experiments involving high-powered rotating magnetic fields, consciousness alteration, and temporal effects. Oppenheimer's response is documented in classified memoranda, partially declassified in 1995. He wrote, "If the reports are accurate, the Germans are pursuing something beyond nuclear fission. The theoretical basis is unclear, but the described effects, if real, suggest manipulation of space-time geometry at macroscopic scales. This should be impossible with current technology. We must determine if they've achieved a breakthrough we've missed." Oppenheimer wasn't alone in this concern. Vannevar Bush, who coordinated Allied scientific research, authorized investigations into unconventional physics. Small teams of physicists explored whether electromagnetic fields could affect time perception, whether consciousness could influence quantum states, whether there were exotic forces beyond the four fundamental interactions. These investigations were tiny compared to Manhattan Project, dozens of researchers versus thousands, thousands of dollars versus billions. But they existed, and they produced classified reports that remain sealed. The Philadelphia experiment allegedly occurred in October 1943. According to controversial testimony from multiple sources, the U.S. Navy attempted to make the destroyer escort USS Eldridge invisible to radar using powerful electromagnetic generators at the Philadelphia Naval Shipyard. The experiment, supposedly based on unified field theory calculations by Einstein, involved generating intense electromagnetic fields around the ship. When activated, witnesses claimed the ship vanished in green fog, became invisible for several minutes, then reappeared. But here's where the story becomes stranger. Some witnesses claimed the ship didn't just become invisible, it teleported. It briefly appeared at Norfolk, Virginia, 200 miles away, then returned to Philadelphia. Crew members supposedly emerged in horrific condition. Some had fused with the ship's bulkheads, metal and flesh merged impossibly. Others experienced madness, claiming to have been unstuck in time, experiencing past and future simultaneously. The Navy denies the experiment occurred. Official records show USS Eldridge wasn't in Philadelphia on the alleged dates. No evidence supports the claims. Yet the story persists, sourced originally from Carl Allen, also known as Carlos Allende, who claimed to have witnessed the experiment from a nearby merchant ship. Allen's credibility is questionable. He was eccentric, possibly mentally ill, and his story contains inconsistencies. But here's what's interesting. Allen's letters about the Philadelphia experiment were sent to Morris Jessup, an astronomer researching UFOs. Jessup received annotated copies of his own book, with margins filled with comments apparently from 3 different writers discussing alien technology and the Philadelphia experiment. The annotations demonstrated knowledge of electromagnetic theory and exotic physics. The Office of Naval Research took interest. They invited Jessup to discuss the annotated book. Shortly after, Jessup died in his car from carbon monoxide poisoning, officially suicide, though questions remain. Why would naval research care about a questionable story from an eccentric writer? Unless elements of the story were true, and they wanted to know who the annotators were and what they knew. Alternative explanation. The Philadelphia experiment never happened, but similar experiments did occur, tests of electromagnetic cloaking, consciousness manipulation, or temporal displacement that produced unexpected effects. The story became folklore, mixing truth with fiction, making it impossible to separate real events from elaboration. Either way, the pattern is suggestive. American military, conducting exotic research paralleling German efforts, encountering effects that shouldn't be possible, and classifying everything so thoroughly that truth becomes unreachable. Polish resistance provided the most detailed intelligence about German special projects. Poland, occupied and brutalized, developed extensive underground networks. These weren't just military resistance, they included scientists, engineers, academics who gathered intelligence methodically. From 1943 onward, Polish agents reported unusual activity near the Czech-Polish border. The Wenceslas mine near Ludwikowice, chosen for reasons beyond mining copper or other conventional resources. Workers conscripted for construction spoke to resistance contacts. They described building underground chambers with peculiar specifications. Floors lined with ceramic tiles arranged in concentric patterns, walls lined with material that absorbed radio frequencies, foundations supporting machinery that would rotate at high speeds. One report, transmitted to London in January 1944, described power consumption. The facility draws more electricity than a city of 50,000. Power comes from dedicated generating stations. Where does such power go? What requires such energy? Another report, March 1944. Prisoners with physics backgrounds are being transferred from Auschwitz and Gross-Rosen to the Ludwikowice facility. The SS is selecting for specific expertise: electromagnetic theory, fluid dynamics, metallurgy. This is not labor, this is technical consultation under duress. By late 1944, reports mentioned Die Glock by name. Not the device itself, prisoners and workers didn't see it, but the code name appeared in overheard SS conversations, on manifest documents briefly visible before being secured. Polish intelligence officer Igor Witkowski would later claim to have accessed SS documents describing Die Glocke in detail. His credibility is debated. He cannot produce the original documents, claiming he was only allowed to read and take notes, not photograph or remove them. But his descriptions are technically sophisticated and internally consistent. Die Glock, 9 feet wide, 12 to 15 feet tall, bell-shaped, 2 counter-rotating cylinders, containing mercury-like substance designated Zerum 525. When powered, the cylinders rotated in opposite directions at high speed. The device glowed violet-purple, emitted high-pitched humming, and generated effects that killed plants, animals, and unprotected humans within proximity. Test results allegedly documented. Metallic objects near the device showed isotopic decay patterns suggesting temporal acceleration. Organic matter exhibited rapid entropy. Plants turned grey and crystalline, crumbling to dust. Human subjects experienced hemorrhaging, disorientation, and sensations of temporal displacement. 5 German scientists initially assigned to the project died within months. The SS replaced them with concentration camp prisoners, physicists forced to work on the project, knowing they'd likely die from exposure. What was Die Glocke's purpose? The documents allegedly described it as exploring alternative propulsion and temporal displacement. Whether this meant time travel specifically or something related gravitational manipulation, space-time warping remains unclear. The British intelligence service, MI6, heard similar reports from Norwegian resistance. Norway's heavy water plant at Rjukan Germans used it to produce deuterium oxide for atomic research. The plant was a legitimate target for sabotage. In February 1943, Norwegian commandos destroyed heavy water production in Operation Gunnerside, one of the war's most successful commando raids. But here's what's less known. Intelligence reports from Rjukan described research beyond atomic weapons. Workers reported experiments involving heavy water exposed to intense magnetic fields, attempts to measure time dilation effects, and equipment designed to detect temporal particles. After the Gunnerside raid, the Germans evacuated remaining heavy water to Germany by ferry. Norwegian resistance sank the ferry, denying Germany the deuterium. But why was Germany so desperate for heavy water if their atomic program was progressing slowly? Some researchers suggest heavy water had dual purpose. Atomic research, yes, but also as a component in exotic physics experiments. Deuterium's different nuclear properties might interact unusually with electromagnetic fields, potentially creating effects related to space-time manipulation. But it's suggestive that both heavy water research and Die Glocke experiments occurred in occupied territories, away from Germany proper, with extreme security. German U-boats constituted another mystery. Several submarines disappeared during the war without trace. Not sunk by Allied forces, no attack records exist, simply vanished between known positions. never arriving at destinations, never found. Where did they go? Equipment failure? Catastrophic accidents? Or something else? Two submarines, U-977 and U-530, surfaced in Argentina months after Germany's surrender. U-977 arrived August 17, 1945. U-530 arrived July 10. Both had departed Norway in April-May, as Germany collapsed. Their commanders claimed to have spent intervening months wandering the South Atlantic, avoiding capture, before surrendering to neutral Argentina. But submarine experts questioned this explanation. The vessel's fuel capacity, food supplies, and crew psychology made prolonged solitary voyaging unlikely. More suspicious, both submarines had been refitted shortly before departure. Official logs showed routine maintenance, but Argentine inspectors noted unusual modifications, additional cargo capacity, upgraded electrical systems, shielded storage compartments. What cargo did they carry? The submarines arrived nearly empty. If they transported materials from Germany, they'd unloaded before surrendering. Where? To whom? Argentina became a refuge for fleeing Nazis. Adolf Eichmann, Josef Mengele, hundreds of others escaped there through ratlines escape networks organized by sympathetic clergy, intelligence operatives, and former SS. If high-ranking Nazis escaped with classified materials, U-boats would be the logical transport. But why two submarines to Argentina specifically, and what was valuable enough to evacuate as Germany collapsed? Allied intelligence tracked Hans Kammler with increasing urgency. By 1945, Kammler controlled all German special weapons programs, V-2 rockets, jet aircraft, and the classified projects. He was the person who knew the most about Germany's technological capabilities. British and American spy networks made capturing Kammler a top priority. His knowledge represented strategic advantage worth more than captured cities. Orders went out. Locate Kammler, prevent his escape, ensure his capture. The orders failed. Kammler vanished in May 1945, last seen in Czechoslovakia. Multiple contradictory accounts exist about his fate. He committed suicide to avoid capture. UNRI SS executed him to preserve secrets. The Soviets captured him and hid this fact. The Americans recruited him through ultra-classified channels even deeper than Operation Paperclip. Each theory has supporting evidence. Each lacks definitive proof. The suicide theory. Several witnesses claimed to have seen or heard about Kammler's death, but no body was ever produced or positively identified. The execution theory. The SS systematically eliminated witnesses as Germany collapsed. Kammler knew too much easier to kill him than risk his capture. The Soviet capture theory. The Soviets reached Kammler's last known location before Americans. They had reason to hide his capture. His knowledge about German weapons would give them post-war advantage. The American recruitment theory, the most controversial. If Americans captured Kammler, why hide it? Operation Paperclip recruited 1,600 German scientists openly. Why would Kammler require deeper concealment? Unless he knew things even other Paperclip scientists didn't. Things so classified that his recruitment couldn't be acknowledged under any circumstances. Then there was the Battle of Los Angeles. February 25, 1942. Just months after Pearl Harbor, America was jumpy, expecting Japanese attacks. Early morning, radar detected unidentified objects approaching Los Angeles. Air raid sirens screamed. Searchlights swept the sky. Anti-aircraft batteries fired over 1,400 shells at something. Witnesses reported seeing disc-shaped objects, moving slowly, seemingly unaffected by exploding shells. The barrage continued for hours. No bombs fell, no planes crashed. When dawn came, the objects were gone. Official explanations evolved. Japanese aircraft, weather balloons, mass hysteria, false alarm. But photographs taken during the incident show searchlights illuminating something. Shells burst around it. It doesn't fall. What was it? The incident occurred during extreme tension. Perhaps nervous gunners fired at nothing. and searchlights and explosions created illusions. Mass psychology could explain much. But here's the unsettling detail. The object's description, disc-shaped, slow-moving, seemingly invulnerable, matches descriptions from other incidents. Foo fighters that Allied pilots encountered over Europe, strange craft seen over Scandinavia, objects described in reports from occupied territories about German experimental aircraft. If Germany had developed disc-shaped craft as early as 1942, could they reach American airspace? Unlikely, but not impossible. Such craft would be reconnaissance testing American air defenses, evaluating whether their technology worked at long range. Alternative, the objects weren't German. They were something else, extraterrestrial, interdimensional, or temporal. Perhaps observers from a future witnessing a historical moment, perhaps echoes of experiments that would occur later, leaking backward through time. This sounds insane, but by late 1944, intelligence analysts were considering insane possibilities because the reports were too consistent, too detailed, too technically specific to dismiss entirely. By war's end, one thing was clear. Neither side fully understood what the other pursued. Germany hunted for Aryan superscience based on ancient texts and mystical beliefs. America built atomic bombs through systematic application of known physics. Britain cracked encryption codes using logic and mathematics. The Soviets pursued dialectical materialist approaches to consciousness research. Each side's efforts seemed lunatic to the others, yet each might have been racing towards similar destinations from different directions. The atomic bomb was scientific, rational, comprehensible. It worked through known physics. Its effects were predictable. But what if the Nazis were pursuing something that worked through unknown physics? Not time travel, as science fiction imagines stepping into a machine and emerging in different era, but something subtler, viewing past or future through consciousness techniques, manipulating probability at quantum scales to favor desired outcomes, creating temporal anomalies in localized regions. Such capabilities would be even more dangerous than atomic weapons because they'd be invisible, untraceable, incomprehensible. And if the Nazis achieved anything even partial success, the victorious Allies would face terrible choice. Destroy the knowledge to ensure it's never used again, or preserve and study it despite its horrific origins. Which choice did they make? The continued classification suggests preserve and study. The knowledge proved too valuable to destroy, too dangerous to acknowledge. In war's final days, the race intensified. Not toward victory, Germany's defeat was certain. The race was toward knowledge, ensuring the enemy's secrets died with them, or better yet, claiming those secrets for yourself. Special operations teams received orders to penetrate Germany's interior, locating specific facilities, capturing specific personnel. The targets weren't just obvious weapon sites, they were laboratories, research centers, locations that intelligence agencies had marked as high interest for reasons not disclosed to the teams themselves. German scientists faced choices: surrender to Soviets, who would transport them to Russia and extract knowledge brutally; surrender to Americans, who might offer better treatment but still forced servitude; attempt escape to South America with secrets that might buy protection; destroy everything and die, taking knowledge to graves. Different scientists made different choices. Some surrendered, some escaped, some died. And some, the ones we know least about, simply vanished, their fates unrecorded, their knowledge's destination unknown. The Secret War's strangest aspect was its continuation after the shooting war ended. Nazi scientists were recruited, Nazi intelligence networks were preserved and redirected, Nazi research programs were studied, replicated, extended. This wasn't just Operation Paperclip, the known program that brought 1,600 scientists to America. This was deeper cooperation, darker compromises, stranger continuations. In bunkers beneath Nevada and New Mexico, in laboratories in Virginia and Maryland, in facilities whose existence remains classified, the work continued. Not building time machines that remained impossible, but exploring the boundaries of physics, consciousness, and temporal manipulation. exploring what the Nazis had discovered in those Polish mountains, in those underground chambers where prisoners died by hundreds to test impossible theories. The knowledge proved too tantalizing to abandon, even if it meant building on foundations laid in blood, even if it meant employing men whose hands were red with atrocities, even if it meant becoming, in some measure, what we'd defeated. Sleep pulls you down now into darkness where time loses meaning. In dreams, you'll fight battles that haven't occurred yet. You'll remember conversations you've never had. Past and future will blur together, indistinguishable. The Nazis believed this blurring was natural to pure Aryans, that consciousness untethered from temporal flow was humanity's birthright, stolen by racial mixing and forgotten through generations. They tried to recover it through science and mysticism combined. They built facilities to amplify it. They sacrificed thousands to understand it. Did they succeed? The evidence remains ambiguous, contradictory, classified. But ask yourself, why do you sometimes dream of places you've never been? Why do you occasionally know things you've never learned? Why does déjà vu feel so real, as if you're remembering something that happened exactly as it's happening now? Perhaps dreams aren't random neural firing. Perhaps they're consciousness slipping through temporal cracks, accessing moments outside normal sequence. Perhaps the Nazis proved this scientifically. Perhaps they created technologies that widened those cracks, making temporal slippage controllable, reproducible, weaponizable. Perhaps that's why the secret war continued, why scientists recruited, why facilities remained operational decades after war's end. Perhaps they learned that time travel doesn't require machines, just the right electromagnetic frequencies, the right consciousness techniques, the right understanding of how observation creates reality. Perhaps you already know this. In dreams you don't remember upon waking. The secret war was fought in shadows. It's still being fought there. Every night, when consciousness loosens from time's flow, you enter that battlefield, whether you know it or not. By January 1945, Germany's defeat was mathematically certain. Soviet armies crushed westward, having turned the tide at Stalingrad and Kursk. They were now deep into Poland, approaching German soil. American and British forces had liberated France, crossed the Rhine, advanced into Germany from the west. German cities burned under continuous Allied bombing. Oil supplies had dried up, crippling the mechanized Wehrmacht. Food was scarce. The infrastructure was collapsing. The Third Reich's thousand-year dream had lasted barely 12. But in underground facilities across Germany, Poland, and Czechoslovakia, work intensified rather than ceased. Resources that might have defended Berlin or evacuated civilians were diverted to projects most Germans didn't know existed. Hitler had retreated into a fantasy world where wonder weapons would reverse Germany's fate. His generals knew this was delusion. They'd learned that miracles don't materialize through wishful thinking. But here's what troubled them. Hitler wasn't entirely delusional. Germany did possess revolutionary technology. Jet aircraft that could outfly Allied fighters, ballistic missiles that struck targets hundreds of miles away, advanced submarines that could stay submerged for weeks. None of these changed the war's outcome. They appeared too late, in too small numbers. But they existed. They worked. So when Hitler spoke of other weapons, weapons even more revolutionary, could the generals be certain he was wrong? SS General Hans Kammler became the Reich's last hope. In January 1945, Hitler gave him absolute authority over all secret weapons programs. This was unprecedented. The Wehrmacht, the Luftwaffe, the SS, all had previously controlled different weapons systems, creating inefficiency. Through rivalry, now Kammler controlled everything. V-2 rockets, jet aircraft production, the uranium program, and the black projects classified so deeply that even other Nazi leaders knew nothing about them. Kammler centralized control ruthlessly. He moved between facilities constantly, appearing without warning, demanding progress reports, executing personnel who failed to deliver results. His personal train carried him from rocket bases at Peenemünde to jet aircraft plants in Bavaria to special project sites in Silesia. What happened in those Silesian facilities? The official record is silent. The facilities were evacuated and destroyed before Allied capture. Documents were burned. Witnesses were executed. What we know comes from fragments prisoner testimony, local resident reports, intelligence summaries, and brief mentions in captured correspondence. These fragments suggest something extraordinary and terrible. The Wenceslas mine complex in Lower Silesia became the epicenter. The SS had evacuated Die Glocke research there from earlier locations, burying it deep underground where Allied bombers couldn't reach. The complex sprawled for miles, not just the mine itself, but connecting tunnels, generator stations, housing for SS personnel, and barracks for prisoners. Concentration camp prisoners from Auschwitz and Gross-Rosen were transferred there in groups. Few survived more than weeks. The mortality rate suggests either brutal working conditions, exposure to toxic materials, or both. The survivors, a handful who were transferred elsewhere before dying, told horrifying stories. One survivor, interviewed by Polish authorities in 1946, described working in a chamber carved from solid rock. The chamber was circular, approximately 100 feet in diameter, 30 feet high. In the center, a platform supporting massive machinery shaped like a bell, surrounded by scaffolding and cables. The prisoner's job was maintenance, cleaning the ceramic tiles that lined the floor, replacing damaged sections. He wasn't told the device's purpose. Guards didn't explain. Prisoners who asked questions were beaten or shot, but he observed effects. When the device operated always at night, always with prisoners evacuated to distant tunnels, lights were visible even miles away, purple and green, pulsing, originating from underground. The light penetrated hundreds of feet of rock and earth. Sound accompanied the light, a humming, almost subsonic, that made your bones vibrate. Windows in nearby villages rattled, dogs howled, livestock became agitated, and the vegetation, within a kilometre of the mine entrance, plants began dying in March 1945. Their leaves turned grey, brittle, crystalline. They crumbled to dust at touch. Trees lost leaves, then bark split and wood turned strange colours. Local Polish residents, still present before Soviet liberation, documented these effects in diaries and letters. They didn't understand what caused them. The SS offered no explanation, simply cordoned off affected areas and shot anyone who approached. The experiments reached peak intensity in March and April 1945. Inside the facility, prisoners forced to work near Die Glocke during operation developed symptoms resembling radiation poisoning: nausea, hemorrhaging, skin lesions, hair loss. But radiation counters, when secretly tested by prisoner scientists, showed nothing unusual. Instead, prisoners described stranger effects: temporal displacement. Time seemed to slow down or speed up randomly. Prisoners would begin a task, look up, find hours had passed, though it felt like minutes, or the reverse, minutes stretched into subjective hours. Some prisoners claimed to see visions, glimpses of other times, future Allied occupation of the facility, or stranger visions, ancient forests, prehistoric creatures, landscapes that couldn't be identified. Were these hallucinations from exposure to unknown energies, or actual temporal viewing? One prisoner, a physicist named Jakob Sporenberg, not his real name, he testified under pseudonym, kept careful notes despite the danger. His testimony, given to American investigators, was classified until 2012. Sporenberg described the device in technical detail: 2 counter-rotating cylinders, each approximately 5 feet tall, 3 feet in diameter, housed within the bell-shaped outer shell. The cylinders contained mercury-like liquid designated Zerum-525, possibly mercury mixed with thorium and beryllium compounds. When powered, the cylinders rotated in opposite directions at extremely high speeds. Sporenberg estimated 15,000 to 20,000 RPM. The rotation generated powerful electromagnetic fields, measurable even at significant distance. But the fields weren't uniform. They pulsed at specific frequencies, creating interference patterns, and objects placed within these patterns exhibited unusual behavior. The SS documentation, allegedly recovered by intelligence officer Igor Witkowski, Described test results with clinical detachment. Test 65. Organic matter exposed to field for 3 minutes. Subject deceased within 6 hours from internal hemorrhaging. Autopsy showed tissue damage inconsistent with known radiation. Cellular structures appeared aged as if subject had experienced rapid biological time passage, while chronological time remained constant. Test 72. Metallic objects placed near device for 10 minutes. Subsequent analysis showed isotopic decay patterns suggesting temporal acceleration. Unstable isotopes that should require years to decay had decayed in minutes. Test 87. Organic matter exposed to high-intensity field. Tissue exhibited entropy reversal molecular bonds, strengthening, complexity increasing before catastrophic breakdown. Effect sustained for approximately 30 seconds, before subject material disintegrated into grey crystalline powder. What were they trying to achieve? The documents used phrases like temporal viewing apparatus, causal manipulation device, and most intriguing, chronological displacement generator. Some researchers interpret these as propulsion research creating anti-gravity effects for advanced aircraft. The bell shape, the rotation, the electromagnetic fields, all consistent with unconventional propulsion theories. Others interpret it as weapons research generating destructive effects through space-time manipulation rather than conventional explosions. But the most disturbing interpretation, the SS attempted to create a device allowing observation or influence of past or future events, not sending physical objects through time that might be impossible but sending information, viewing what happened or will happen, altering probability of future events by observing them in superposition before collapse. This sounds like fantasy. But quantum mechanics demonstrates that observation affects reality. Experiments show that measuring a photon's path changes its behavior retroactively, as if the measurement reaches backward in time to alter what already occurred. Could this principle be scaled up? Could sufficiently powerful observation of macroscopic events influence their outcome? The Nazis believed so. Whether they were right remains classified. In late April 1945, Soviet forces approached Silesia. Kammler ordered evacuation. The evidence suggests systematic destruction. The SS executed prisoners who had worked on the project. Estimates range from dozens to hundreds. Workers were marched into tunnels, shot, tunnels collapsed. Engineers dismantled Die Glocke itself. Some components were packed for transport. Others were destroyed, smashed, melted, rendered unrecognizable. The SS collapsed mine entrances with explosives, sealing the underground complex. When Soviet troops arrived in early May, they found ruins, bodies buried in collapsed tunnels, radioactive anomalies that made Geiger counters chatter. But no functioning equipment, no complete documentation. The Soviets searched extensively. They knew something significant had occurred there, the local reports, the massive power consumption, the unusual security. But what they recovered was fragmentary, or so we're told. Soviet archives from this period remain largely classified. What did they actually find? What did they understand about Die Glocke's purpose and capabilities? Russian researchers in the 1990s, accessing some declassified materials, reported that Soviet scientists studied the Wenceslas mine site for months. They attempted to reconstruct what occurred there based on physical evidence. Their conclusions were forwarded to Stalin personally, then classified at the highest level. Those conclusions have never been released. But where did the evacuated components go? Multiple U-boats departed Germany in April and May 1945. Most surrendered or were sunk. 2 surfaced in Argentina months after Germany's surrender. U-977, commanded by Oberleutnant Heinz Schaefer, surfaced August 17, 1945. That's more than 3 months after Germany surrendered on May 8. Schaefer claimed to have spent the intervening time submerged in the South Atlantic, wandering aimlessly, before deciding to surrender to Argentina rather than face Allied capture. Submarine experts questioned this explanation. U-977's fuel capacity, food supplies, and battery endurance made prolonged submerged voyaging unlikely. Diesel submarines must surface regularly to run engines and recharge batteries. Remaining submerged for 3 months would require exceptional circumstances and likely external support. More suspicious, U-977 had been refitted shortly before departure. Official logs showed routine maintenance, but when Argentine authorities inspected the vessel, they noted unusual features. Additional cargo capacity, reinforced storage compartments, upgraded electrical systems beyond standard submarine requirements. What cargo had these compartments held? When U-977 surrendered, it was nearly empty. If it had transported materials from Germany, it had unloaded them before surrendering. Where? The South Atlantic contains numerous remote islands. Argentina's coast offers countless unmonitored locations. If U-977 unloaded cargo before surrendering, that cargo could be anywhere. U-530, commanded by Otto Vermuth, arrived in Argentina July 10, 2 months after surrender. Its commander offered similar explanations. Wandering the South Atlantic, avoiding capture. Argentine inspection revealed similar modifications to U-977. Both submarines had departed from Norway, not the Baltic where they were supposedly based. Both traveled similar routes. Both arrived in Argentina specifically, not other South American countries. Coincidence? Or coordinated operation? Argentina had become a haven for fleeing Nazis. Adolf Eichmann, architect of the final solution, lived openly in Buenos Aires under assumed name until Israeli agents captured him in 1960. Joseph Mengele, the angel of death from Auschwitz, lived in Argentina and Paraguay for decades before drowning in Brazil in 1979. How many others escaped undetected? Hundreds, certainly, perhaps thousands. The Ratlines escape networks organized by sympathetic clergy, former SS, and intelligence operatives moved Nazis across Europe to South America with remarkable efficiency. Why did the Allies allow this? Multiple reasons. Some escapees were valuable intelligence assets. Some possessed knowledge that Western powers wanted access to. Some were protected by Catholic clergy, who viewed anti-communism as more important than justice. And some, the highest-level escapees, may have carried knowledge too valuable to let fall into Soviet hands. Better they escape to monitored locations in South America than be captured by the Soviets. The town of Bariloche in Argentina's Patagonia region developed a large German community, remote, mountainous, accessible by sea ideal refuge. In the surrounding wilderness, isolated estates appeared, purchased by wealthy Germans who arrived after the war with no apparent source of funds. What happened in those estates? Argentine authorities, turning blind eye to Nazi refugees for political reasons, didn't investigate closely. The estates existed in relative isolation for decades. In 2013, Argentine archaeologists excavated a location in Patagonia's jungle. They discovered extensive Nazi artifacts, coins, plates, cutlery, insignia all bearing swastikas and eagle emblems. The site appeared to be a prepared refuge, reinforced structures hidden in dense forest, underground storage, defensive positions. This wasn't a hideout thrown together by desperate fugitives. This was infrastructure built deliberately, provisioned in advance, designed for long-term occupation. Who built it? When? For what purpose? The Argentine government classified much of what was found there. Antarctica presented another mystery. German expeditions had mapped Neuschwabenland extensively before the war. They claimed the territory for Germany. They photographed coastline, documented ice-free regions, noted magnetic anomalies. Why such interest in frozen wasteland? In 1946 through 47, American Admiral Richard Byrd led Operation High Jump to Antarctica. The operation deployed 4,700 personnel, 13 ships, and 23 aircraft. This was essentially a military invasion force. Official purposes: scientific research, establishing American territorial claims, testing equipment in polar conditions. But consider the scale. Nearly 5,000 personnel for scientific research, multiple aircraft carriers, extensive military hardware. Operation High Jump was scheduled for 8 months. It ended abruptly after 8 weeks. Several aircraft were lost. Personnel were evacuated hastily. Official explanation: unexpected weather, equipment failures, logistical challenges. But rumors circulated. Admiral Byrd allegedly told Chilean journalists that America needed to prepare for aircraft that can fly pole to pole at incredible speeds. Other reports claimed the expedition encountered unknown craft that disabled their equipment. Still others suggested they discovered something in the ice structures, installations, technology that wasn't supposed to be there. Most Operation High Jump records remain classified. Freedom of Information Act requests produce heavily redacted documents or denials citing national security. What did they find in Antarctica? Why does it remain classified 80 years later? One possibility: nothing. The expedition was routine, ended early due to mundane problems, and classification is bureaucratic inertia. Another possibility: they found evidence of Nazi presence, hidden bases, supply caches, perhaps even installations still occupied by SS holdouts. This would be politically problematic. Admitting that Nazis established Antarctic presence would raise questions about why Allies didn't prevent it, didn't pursue them, didn't secure the region immediately after war's end. A third possibility is stranger. They found something not built by Nazis, something older, ruins beneath the ice, technological artifacts from civilizations before recorded history. This sounds like fiction, but Antarctica was ice-free in geologically recent past. If advanced civilizations existed before the ice ages, their remnants could be preserved beneath glaciers. The Nazis believed this. The Ahnenerbe searched for Atlantean ruins. If they found something in Antarctica or elsewhere, and if that something suggested advanced prehistoric technologies, they might have, tempted to recover and replicate those technologies. Hans Kammler's fate remains history's greatest mystery. Last seen in May 1945 in Czechoslovakia, Kammler vanished. Multiple contradictory accounts exist. He committed suicide to avoid capture. Several witnesses claimed this, but no body was ever produced. The SS executed him to preserve secrets. As witnesses were systematically eliminated, Kammler himself might have been considered too dangerous to survive. The Soviets captured him and hid this fact. They reached his last known location first and had motive to conceal his capture. His knowledge would give them strategic advantage. The Americans recruited him through channels even deeper than Operation Paperclip. If Kammler's knowledge was valuable enough, extraordinary measures to secure him, including complete documentation suppression, might be justified. Each theory has supporting evidence. Each lacks definitive proof. If Kammler survived through any means, he would have known the location of all special projects, the results of all experiments, the success or failure of Die Glocke and similar devices, where materials and personnel were evacuated, what technologies actually worked. This knowledge would be worth anything to Allied powers. Worth lies, cover-ups, moral compromises. Is Kammler the reason files remain classified? Is he the reason certain questions about Nazi black projects receive stonewalling or denial? Or did Kammler die in Czechoslovakia, his knowledge dying with him, leaving only fragments and speculation? Die Glocke itself disappeared. Some researchers claim Americans recovered it and transported it to the United States. The most commonly suggested locations: Area 51 in Nevada, Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Ohio, or Brookhaven National Laboratory in New York. Is this plausible? If Americans reached the Silesian facilities before complete destruction, they might have recovered components, documentation, even the device itself in pieces. They would immediately classify everything at the highest levels. They would recruit the scientists who understood it. They would attempt to replicate and improve it. And if they succeeded, even partially, they would never acknowledge it. How could they? We recovered Nazi time travel research and continued it. Isn't an announcement any government could make. But there's a strange incident that might connect to Die Glocke's fate. December 9, 1965. Thousands of witnesses across Michigan, Ohio, and Pennsylvania reported seeing a fireball streak across the sky before crashing in woods near Kecksburg, Pennsylvania. First responders arrived to find a bronze, bell-shaped object, approximately 12 feet long and 9 feet wide. The object was warm, covered in hieroglyphic-like symbols, and appeared metallic but not like any conventional aircraft. Military personnel arrived within hours, cordoned off the area, removed the object on a flatbed truck under tarp, and officially declared nothing was found. The object's description matches Die Glocke's dimensions almost exactly. Bell-shaped, approximately 9 feet wide, 12 feet tall. Metallic bronze color. Was the Kecksburg object Die Glocke? Had it been recovered and stored for 2 decades before being transported, when something went wrong and it fell from a cargo plane? Or was it a crashed Soviet satellite, as officially claimed, despite looking nothing like known Soviet spacecraft? Or was it something else entirely, perhaps related to Die Glocke research, but built later by Americans or Soviets, using knowledge recovered from Silesia? John Murphy, a news reporter who photographed the object before military confiscation, had his camera seized and film destroyed. He received threats to remain silent. Years later, Murphy died in circumstances his family questioned officially a car accident, but suspiciously convenient. Why threaten and possibly kill a reporter over a crashed satellite? Unless it wasn't a satellite. Unless it was something that confirmed research the government wanted to keep hidden. As spring 1945 turned to summer, Germany surrendered, Hitler died, and the Reich ended. But had the most dangerous secrets ended with it? The evidence suggests not. The secrets metastasized, spreading into victorious powers' hands. American, Soviet, and British intelligence competed to capture scientists, seize documents, secure facilities. What they found, what they understood, what they continued, this remains partially hidden behind classification. We know some things. Operation Paperclip brought 1,600 German scientists to America. Many had been Nazi Party members. Some had SS connections. Their backgrounds were sanitized, their crimes overlooked, their knowledge extracted. But who came through unofficial channels? Who was recruited but never acknowledged? What knowledge was deemed too valuable to share even with allies? The Cold War's secret projects, MKULTRA, remote viewing, psychotronics, all explored consciousness, manipulation, altered states, and perception of time. These weren't new research directions, they were continuations of what Nazis had begun. In facilities across America and Russia, experiments continued, not building time machines that remained impossible, but exploring boundaries, testing whether consciousness could influence quantum events, investigating whether electromagnetic fields could alter time perception, attempting to replicate whatever the Nazis had achieved in Silesia. Sleep pulls you down into darkness where memories blur and time dissolves. In dreams, you'll experience impossible things. You'll fly without wings. You'll speak languages you've never learned. You'll know things you've never been told. The Nazis believed this was evidence of consciousness's natural ability to transcend temporal flow. Dreams, they theorized, were consciousness slipping between moments, accessing information from past lives or future possibilities. They tried to induce this state artificially, electromagnetic fields at specific frequencies, drugs that altered neurological timing, meditation combined with technology. Did they succeed? The facilities were destroyed, the records were burned, the witnesses were executed. But the classification persists. The questions are deflected, the files remain sealed. Perhaps because there's nothing to hide. Perhaps because the research failed completely, yielding only death and suffering, or perhaps because they succeeded. Perhaps because, in those underground chambers, German scientists discovered that time travel doesn't require machines, just the right electromagnetic frequencies, the right consciousness state, the right understanding of quantum observation. Perhaps because that knowledge proved too dangerous to acknowledge yet too valuable to destroy. Perhaps because the research continues, in bunkers you'll never visit, pursuing questions that should never be asked. As you drift toward sleep, consider, what if the barrier between moments is thinnest when consciousness loosens from waking state? What if dreams aren't random but windows into other times, other timelines, other possibilities? What if the Nazis proved this scientifically, and what they proved still shapes the world in ways you'll never be told? The Twilight Reich fell 80 years ago. But some shadows never lift. Some secrets never die. Some doors, once opened, can never be closed again. Victory brought peace, but not answers. Instead, the mysteries deepened, multiplied, and mutated through generations like viruses of uncertainty, infecting the collective mind. The war ended May 8, 1945 in Europe, September 2nd in the Pacific. The killing stopped. The rebuilding began. And the secret competition for knowledge, for scientists, for technologies that shouldn't exist intensified. Operation Paperclip began officially in 1945 as a program to recruit German scientists for American research. Initially modest in scope, focused on preventing Soviet acquisition of German expertise. But Paperclip's scope exceeded any public acknowledgement. Over 1,600 German scientists, engineers, and technicians came to America through official channels. Many had been Nazi Party members. Some had SS connections. Their backgrounds were whitewashed records destroyed, affiliations removed, war crimes ignored. The justification was strategic necessity. These men possessed knowledge about rockets, jet engines, aerodynamics, electronics. Knowledge America needed to counter Soviet power. But here's what troubles researchers. The 1,600 acknowledged Paperclip recruits can't account for all the German scientists who disappeared from Europe after the war. Hundreds more vanished from camps, from custody, from hospitals. Where did they go? Some went to the Soviet Union Operation Osoavia Kim, captured thousands of German specialists for Stalin. But others? Intelligence documents, partially declassified, reference alternative recruitment channels and special protocols for certain high-value targets. Who were these special cases? Why did they require protocols beyond standard Paperclip? What knowledge did they possess that 1,600 acknowledged recruits didn't? Werner von Braun became Paperclip's public face. The charismatic rocket scientist who built Hitler's V-2 missiles and later built America's space program, Time magazine covers, presidential audiences, national hero who put Americans on the moon. Less discussed? His SS membership, his direct knowledge of concentration camp conditions at Mittelbau-Dora, his presence at hangings of prisoners who attempted sabotage. Von Braun wasn't merely a scientist forced to work for Nazis, he was an active participant who benefited from slave labor and knew exactly what was happening. America overlooked this. The Cold War required compromises. If recruiting Nazi scientists prevented Soviet advantages, morality became secondary. But von Braun was merely the visible tip of a much larger iceberg. Walter Gerlach, the physicist who allegedly visited Die Glocke facilities, continued electromagnetic research in America. His work, funded by military contracts, explored biological effects of magnetic fields, consciousness alteration through electromagnetic stimulation, and applications classified as national security relevant. When researchers approached Gerlach decades later about his SS work, he became hostile. Some knowledge should stay buried, he insisted. Some doors should never be reopened. What doors? What had Gerlach seen in Silesia that haunted him decades later? Victor Schauberger, the implosion researcher who worked at Mauthausen concentration camp, moved to Texas in 1958. Americans were interested in his anti-gravity theories, implosion-based propulsion that supposedly manipulated gravity through water vortexes. Schauberger arrived in America, expecting to develop his technology. Instead, he was isolated, his movements restricted, his research notes confiscated. He signed documents under duress. He claimed surrendering all rights to his work. He returned to Austria broken, dying days later. Before death, he told his son, "They took everything. Everything I worked for. They understand it now. They'll use it." Use it for what? Schauberger's papers remain largely classified. The 1950s brought a UFO epidemic. Sightings exploded across America and Europe. Project Blue Book, the Air Force's investigation program, documented over 12,000 reports between 1947 and 1969. The objects described matched a pattern: disc-shaped craft, incredible speeds, right-angle turns at velocity that should kill any pilot, silent flight, and ability to hover motionlessly before accelerating to supersonic speed instantaneously. This wasn't just hysteria. Trained military observers reported these objects. Radar tracked them. Photographs captured them grainy, unclear, but showing something. Official explanations evolved. Weather balloons, Venus, swamp gas, temperature inversions, mass hysteria. Each incident received debunking. Each witness was portrayed as mistaken or delusional. But the descriptions were remarkably consistent, and they matched descriptions of alleged Nazi experimental aircraft, the Foo Fighters that Allied pilots encountered during the war. The disc-shaped craft supposedly developed from Vril Society designs. Had some Nazi technology survived? Had prototypes been evacuated and continued development? Were these sightings of recovered Nazi craft being tested by American or Soviet military, or were they something else, extraterrestrial, interdimensional, temporal? Objects from elsewhere observing humanity, or perhaps from elsewhere observers from future witnessing historical moments. In 1952, multiple radar stations detected unidentified objects over Washington, D.C., not ambiguous blips, clear returns, showing objects hovering near the White House and Capitol. Fighter jets scrambled. The objects outmaneuvered them effortlessly, vanishing and reappearing. Press coverage was extensive. The Air Force held a press conference, the largest since World War II, to explain the incidents. Temperature inversions causing false radar returns, they claimed, despite multiple trained radar operators insisting they tracked physical objects. If American military possessed recovered German technology, would they test it over their own capital, possibly to demonstrate capabilities to Soviet intelligence, to test detection systems, to send messages? Or the objects were exactly what they appeared to be, craft using technology beyond acknowledged capabilities, operated by someone for purposes unknown. The alleged Montauk project represented the darkest continuation theory. According to controversial witnesses, primarily Preston Nichols and Al Bielek, the government secretly continued Nazi time experiments at Montauk Air Force Station on Long Island, New York, from the 1970s through 1983. The story, equipment and research brought from Germany through Operation Paperclip, were combined with modern electronics and computer systems. The facility allegedly conducted experiments involving time travel, consciousness manipulation, mind control, and interdimensional portals. Nichols claimed to be a project engineer who recovered suppressed memories years later. His descriptions included the Montauk chair, a device that amplified psychic abilities, allowing trained operators to create physical thought forms and open temporal rifts. Experiments allegedly sent people backward in time to specific historical moments. Some time travelers never returned. Others came back insane or physically aged despite spending only hours absent. One experiment supposedly opened a portal to 1943, connecting to the Philadelphia experiment and creating a temporal loop linking both projects. The evidence is controversial and largely testimonial. Nichols and Bielek's credibility is questioned, their stories contain inconsistencies, their backgrounds include dubious claims, and they profit from books and lectures about Montauk. But circumstantial factors lend disturbing credibility. Montauk AFS was indeed an active military installation with massive radar equipment, the SAGE radar system, one of the most powerful ever built. The base closed suddenly in 1981, officially for budget reasons, but personnel were removed hastily and buildings sealed with unusual security measures. Local residents near Montauk reported phenomena throughout the 70s and early 80s. Strange lights, low-frequency humming sounds, animals behaving bizarrely, and personal experiences of missing time periods they couldn't account for, where they'd lose hours with no memory of what occurred. Multiple witnesses unconnected to Nichols or Bielek provided similar descriptions. They described seeing people in strange uniforms entering underground facilities, hearing unusual sounds at night, experiencing electrical equipment malfunctions near the base, Duncan Cameron, another alleged Montauk participant, described experiments where operators in the Montauk chair would visualize specific past moments, and the equipment would supposedly lock onto those moments, creating viewing capability or even physical portals. Cameron's descriptions of the technology rotating electromagnetic fields, consciousness interface, temporal coordinate targeting bear striking similarity to descriptions of Die Glocke and related Nazi research. Coincidence? Fabrication based on Nazi research descriptions? Or genuine continuation of that research using technology and understanding developed over 3 decades? Whether Montauk was real, exaggerated, or fabricated, it reflected authentic anxieties. The CIA's MKULTRAAR program demonstrated government willingness to conduct unethical experiments. MKULTRA investigated mind control through drugs, hypnosis, sensory deprivation, and electromagnetic stimulation from 1953 through 1973. Officially, MKULTRAARTRA sought defensive capabilities, understanding brainwashing, to protect American personnel from communist techniques. Actually, it was offensive research attempting to create controllable agents, erase memories, implant suggestions, and break human will. MKULTRA experiments were conducted on unwitting subjects. Prostitutes were hired to dose clients with LSD while CIA agents watched through two-way mirrors. Mental patients were given massive doses of drugs and subjected to weeks of sensory deprivation. Prisoners were experimented on without consent. When MKULTRA was exposed in 1975, the public was horrified. If the government conducted those experiments, documented, admitted, partially revealed, what else did they conduct that remains hidden? Remote viewing programs provided another example. Officially acknowledged after declassification, these programs ran from 1972 through 1995. The CIA and Defense Intelligence Agency funded experiments training personnel to perceive distant locations or events through psychic means. The programs operated at Fort Meade, Maryland, and Stanford Research Institute in California. Results were mixed. Some remote viewers produced information that seemed impossibly accurate. Ed Dames located hostages, described enemy facilities, perceived events before they occurred. Joe McMonigal provided intelligence that couldn't be explained by conventional means. Other sessions produced nothing useful. The success rate was low, perhaps 20% above chance. But that 20% included hits so specific, so detailed, that they couldn't be dismissed as lucky guessing. The programs continued for over 20 years. Why? Because someone believed they worked. Because even low success rates provided advantages when the stakes were high enough. And because the theoretical basis, consciousness affecting quantum states, observation influencing reality, wasn't pseudoscience but cutting-edge physics. If remote viewing worked even partially, what else might work? Viewing the past? Influencing future probabilities? Consciousness-based time travel? Soviet programs went further. The KGB's Department 8 investigated psychotronics using electromagnetic fields and other means to influence human consciousness. They explored time perception alteration, attempting to make interrogation minutes feel like hours to subjects. Russian physicist Nikolai Kozyrev theorized that time possessed physical properties, that time itself was a form of energy that could be measured, harnessed, and potentially manipulated. Kozyrev conducted experiments, supposedly demonstrating time's energy. He claimed that certain processes, chemical reactions, biological growth, stellar radiation, generated time flow that could be detected with specialized equipment. His research was controversial, difficult to replicate, and dismissed by mainstream physics. But the Soviet government funded it for decades. Military applications were obvious. If time could be manipulated, even slightly, strategic advantages would be enormous. Were Soviets independently pursuing Nazi research paths, or had they captured similar knowledge from facilities they liberated in 1945? Soviet archives from this period remain largely classified. What did they recover from Silesia? What did they understand about Die Glocke? What did they attempt to replicate? The Kecksburg incident of December 1965 remained unexplained. The object's description, bell-shaped, 9 feet wide, 12 feet tall, matched Die Glocke's dimensions precisely, too precisely to dismiss as coincidence. Witnesses described bronze metallic surface, warm to touch, covered in symbols resembling hieroglyphics or runic writing. The symbols appeared raised, not painted, integral to the object's structure. Military response was immediate and overwhelming. Within hours, Army personnel cordoned off the area. Within a day, the object was removed on a flatbed truck, covered with tarp, destination unknown. Official statement: nothing was found. But dozens of witnesses saw the object. Volunteer firefighters, police officers, local residents, their descriptions match. Their credibility is unquestioned. These weren't attention seekers, but ordinary people who witnessed something extraordinary. John Murphy, a news reporter who arrived quickly and photographed the object before military confiscation, had his camera seized and film destroyed. He was threatened to remain silent. His audio description of the event survived, recorded before confiscation. Murphy described a smooth bronze surface, no seams visible, writing in unknown script, covering a band around the lower portion. The object was intact, not crashed and damaged but whole, as if it had landed rather than fallen. Years later, Murphy died in a car accident. His family questioned the circumstances, suspicious timing, convenient outcome. Was Murphy silenced, or did he simply die in a mundane accident years after the event? Freedom of Information Act requests about Kecksburg produced heavily redacted documents. NASA admitted recovering something but claimed no records survived. The Air Force admitted military presence but denied recovering any object. Yet witnesses saw the object loaded onto a truck. They saw it transported. Where did it go? If it was a crashed Soviet satellite, official explanation: why the extreme secrecy? Why confiscate photographs? Why threaten witnesses? Crashed satellites were recovered publicly before and since, unless it wasn't a satellite, unless it was something that confirmed research the government wanted hidden, something bell-shaped, like Die Glocke, that had been recovered from Germany 20 years earlier and was being studied or transported when something went wrong. In 1991, former Lockheed engineer Boyd Bushman gave a deathbed interview. Bushman had worked at Area 51 and Wright-Patterson Air Force Base on classified aerospace projects. He held 27 patents on electromagnetic systems, laser guidance, and propulsion technologies. Near death, Bushman spoke about projects he'd worked on. He described bell-shaped devices using counter-rotating electromagnetic fields almost identical to Die Glocke descriptions. He claimed these devices were recovered Nazi technology, studied and reverse-engineered at Area 51. Bushman's technical descriptions were sophisticated. He discussed field configurations, rotation velocities, material properties. He wasn't regurgitating conspiracy theories, he was describing engineering challenges from personal experience. He also mentioned biological effects. Personnel working near activated devices experienced nausea, temporal disorientation, rapid aging of organic materials, exactly matching prisoner testimony from Wenceslas mine. Bushman died shortly after the interview. His credibility remains debated. He held legitimate patents and worked on classified projects. But some of his other claims seemed outlandish. Yet his descriptions of bell-shaped devices were specific, technical, and consistent with other fragmentary evidence about Die Glocke's fate. Antarctica remained off-limits in peculiar ways. The Antarctic Treaty of 1959 prohibited military activities and most exploitation, essentially freezing territorial claims. Multiple nations maintain research stations, but vast regions remain unexplored. Official explanations cite environmental protection and scientific cooperation. But the treaty's timing, less than 15 years after World War II, raises questions. Were the major powers agreeing to leave something undisturbed, something discovered during Operation High Jump, something that all nations decided was safer left alone? The treaty signatories included countries with no previous Antarctic interests. Why did they suddenly care about frozen continent thousands of miles away? In 1947, Admiral Byrd allegedly told a Chilean newspaper that America needed to prepare for aircraft that can fly pole to pole at incredible speeds. The quote, "if genuine contested but widely circulated, preceded any known technology capable of such performance." What did Byrd encounter in Antarctica? Why did Operation High Jump end abruptly? What's buried in classified records that justified and continuing classification for 80 years? Some researchers claim German bases in Antarctica remained operational after the war, staffed by SS holdouts, continuing research in isolation. This sounds like fantasy. How could they survive without resupply, without resources, for decades? But what if they didn't need to survive long? What if the bases were discovered, their occupants captured or killed, their equipment confiscated? That would be politically problematic. Admitting Nazi Antarctic presence would raise questions about Allied failure to prevent it. Simpler to classify everything and maintain the fiction that Antarctica was pristine, unexplored, uninhabited except by penguins. German communities in Argentina thrived through the decades. In 1960, Israeli agents captured Adolf Eichmann in Buenos Aires. His capture proved high-ranking Nazis had indeed escaped there, lived openly under thin cover for 15 years. If Eichmann escaped, who else did? Josef Mengele lived in Argentina and Paraguay for decades before drowning in Brazil in 1979. The Angel of Death, who experimented on twins at Auschwitz, lived comfortably in South America for 34 years after the war. In 2013, Argentine archaeologists excavated a site in Patagonia's jungle. They discovered extensive Nazi artifacts, coins, plates, knives, insignia, all bearing swastikas and eagles. The site appeared to be a prepared refuge, reinforced structures hidden in dense forest. This wasn't a simple hideout. This was infrastructure, multiple buildings, underground storage, defensive positions. Built deliberately, provisioned in advance, designed for long-term occupation. Who built it? When? How many such sites exist undiscovered? The Argentine government classified much of what was found. Why? Argentina has acknowledged sheltering Nazi refugees in 1973. President Perón admitted it publicly. What about this particular site requires continued secrecy? CIA declassified documents revealed disturbing facts. In 1998, the Nazi War Crimes Disclosure Act required intelligence agencies to declassify World War II documents. Thousands of pages were released over subsequent years. The documents showed the CIA knew Martin Bormann survived the war and lived in South America. They tracked hundreds of Nazi refugees, documented their locations, but rarely acted. Why? Because some Nazis were useful. Some provided intelligence about communist activities. Some possessed scientific knowledge. Some could be leveraged for political purposes. Justice became secondary to strategic advantage. But more troubling, thousands of pages remain withheld, citing national security concerns. In 2007, Freedom of Information Act responses revealed ongoing classification of World War II materials. What from 1945 could still threaten national security in 2025? 80 years later, what secrets still require hiding? Possibilities. Embarrassing facts about recruited Nazis, extent of knowledge about Holocaust while it was occurring, evidence of Allied leaders making deals with Nazi officials, or something about recovered technologies. Technologies like Die Glock, technologies that worked even partially. Technologies that continue to be studied, developed, weaponized, technologies too dangerous to acknowledge but too valuable to abandon. Deathbed confessions accumulated over decades. Elderly Germans facing mortality spoke of things they'd witnessed. These weren't attention seekers, but men unburdening souls before whatever judgment awaited. A former Wehrmacht soldier described seeing Die Glocke tested in Poland. The purple light, the humming that made bones vibrate, the dead animals scattered around the facility afterward, their bodies grey and brittle. An electrical engineer who worked at Wenceslas mine described the counter-rotating cylinders and the mercury-like liquid that glowed when charged. He described the ceramic tiles arranged in specific patterns, the massive power cables, the shielded control room where operators worked. A U-boat crewman claimed his vessel transported special cargo to Argentina, sealed containers he was forbidden to approach. The containers were unloaded at night, at an unmarked location, by people who weren't regular military. Were these confessions truth, embellishment, delusion? Most came from men with verifiable military records. Their service was documented. Their presence at relevant locations was confirmed. Their technical knowledge was genuine. They were dying. They had nothing to gain from lying. Perhaps they sought absolution. Perhaps they wanted truth known before it died with them. Theoretical physics evolved, making Nazi ambitions seem less impossible. In 1949, Kurt Gödel proved Einstein's equations allowed closed time-like curves. In 1988, Kip Thorne demonstrated traversable wormholes were theoretically possible. In 1994, Miguel Alcubierre proposed a warp drive, using exotic matter to compress space-time. None of these made time travel practical, but they removed it from science fiction to legitimate physics discussion. The question shifted. Not whether time travel was theoretically possible it was, but whether technology could ever manipulate space-time enough to achieve it. Die Glocker's description, counter-rotating fields creating intense electromagnetic effects, resembles theoretical descriptions of space-time manipulation. If Nazi scientists stumbled onto something that modern physicists are only now describing mathematically, what else might they have achieved? Sleep approaches. The boundary between waking and dreaming thins. In this liminal state, questions multiply faster than answers. Why does classification persist 80 years after the war? What knowledge is still considered too dangerous to reveal? What technologies recovered from Silesia continue to be studied in facilities whose existence isn't acknowledged? The Nazis pursued impossible goals with fanatical determination. They killed thousands in the pursuit. Did they achieve anything beyond horror? The evidence suggests something, not time travel as science fiction imagines it, but something consciousness, manipulation, temporal viewing, space-time effects at small scales, something that justified continuing the research, something that multiple governments decided was too valuable to abandon despite its horrific origins, something that shapes the world in ways you're never told. As consciousness fades toward sleep, time becomes fluid, past and future blur. Moments that haven't occurred yet feel like memories. Places you've never been seem familiar. Is this dreams? Or is it consciousness temporarily freed from temporal flow, accessing information across time the way remote viewers access information across space? The Nazis believed the latter. They built technology to amplify it. Perhaps they succeeded. Perhaps that's why the shadows never lift. Perhaps that's why the questions never end. Sleep now. Dream of things that haven't happened yet. Wake with knowledge you shouldn't possess. And wonder, is this your mind wandering randomly, or is it evidence that the research continues, using you as an unwitting participant in experiments that officially don't exist? The long shadow reaches forward through decades. It touches you now, in this moment between waking and sleeping. It will still be there when you wake. If you wake, as night deepens and sleep approaches, the unanswered questions multiply like shadows, each spawning more darkness than light dispels. Did the Nazis actually achieve time travel, even in limited form? The evidence remains maddeningly ambiguous. On one side, testimony from witnesses with verifiable backgrounds, physical anomalies at test sites, the massive resources devoted to these projects, and theoretical physics suggesting it might be possible. On the other side, no recovered working devices, no smoking gun documentation, powerful incentives for fabrication, and the sheer unlikelihood of achieving something modern physics barely comprehends. But here's what we know with certainty. Something happened in those Silesian mountains. Prisoners died there by the hundreds from exposure to unknown effects. Local residents documented bizarre phenomena, lights, sounds, dying vegetation. The SS devoted enormous resources to projects so classified that even other Nazi leaders didn't know details. What was it? What were they building? What did they achieve? Consider the strongest affirmative evidence. Multiple independent witnesses, Polish locals, German veterans, concentration camp survivors, described identical phenomena at the Wenceslas mine facility. Purple lights visible underground, temporal disorientation, rapid decay of organic matter, electromagnetic effects beyond conventional explanation. These witnesses had no contact with each other. They reported their experiences decades apart, to different investigators, in different contexts, yet their descriptions match with uncanny precision. Either they all experienced similar phenomena, something real that produced these effects, or they coordinated an elaborate hoax spanning decades for no apparent benefit. Which is more likely, that dozens of people independently fabricated identical lies, or that something extraordinary occurred in those underground chambers? Physical evidence exists, though interpreted differently by skeptics and believers. In 2003, researchers examined the area around the Wenceslas mine complex. They found unusual isotopic ratios in soil samples, elements showing decay patterns inconsistent with natural occurrence. Radiation counters detected anomalies, not traditional radioactivity, not gamma or beta radiation, but something else that affected instruments in ways that shouldn't occur naturally. Structural remains showed ceramic linings designed to withstand extreme heat and unusual electromagnetic properties. Foundations for massive rotating machinery. Power cable conduits sized for extraordinary electrical loads. This infrastructure existed. It was built for some purpose. The question is, what purpose? Conventional weapons research? Perhaps. But nothing about conventional weapons explains the biological effects, the temporal disorientation, the isotopic anomalies. The Kecksburg object remains physical evidence, or at least widely witnessed evidence. Thousands saw the fireball streak across the sky. Dozens saw the object on the ground before military confiscation. These weren't unreliable witnesses, they were volunteer firefighters, police officers, ordinary citizens with no reason to fabricate. John Murphy photographed it. Though the military seized his film, his contemporaneous audio description survived. Bronze surface, no visible seams, unknown symbols, bell-shaped, the object's dimensions matching D-Glock 9 feet wide, 12 feet tall seems unlikely as coincidence, especially given the symbols described, hieroglyphic-like or runic writing, raised rather than painted. If the object was a crashed Soviet satellite, why the extreme response? Why confiscate photographs? Why threaten witnesses? Crashed satellites had been recovered publicly before. Unless it wasn't a satellite. Unless it was something that confirmed research the government desperately wanted hidden. Something bell-shaped. Something covered in symbols. Something that had been recovered from Germany 20 years earlier, studied at classified facilities, and was being transported when something went catastrophically wrong. Hans Kammler's disappearance is perhaps the most suggestive evidence. As the person knowing the most about Germany's most classified programs, his fate should have been documented meticulously. Captured prisoners were photographed, interrogated, their statements recorded, high-value targets were tracked obsessively. Kammler simply vanished. No confirmed death, no captured photographs, no interrogation transcripts, nothing. The most logical explanation: Americans or Soviets captured him and hid this fact for strategic reasons. His knowledge was valuable enough to break conventions about documenting captured prisoners. But which nation captured him? And what did he tell them? If the Soviets captured Kammler, they gained understanding of Germany's most advanced programs. This might explain Soviet advances in certain exotic technologies, psychotronics, consciousness, manipulation, time perception research. If Americans captured Kammler, same implications apply. The man who oversaw V-2 rockets, jet aircraft, and Die Glocke would know what worked, what failed, what was close to breakthrough, what was pure fantasy. That knowledge would shape post-war research directions for decades. It might explain why certain research paths were pursued despite seeming unlikely, because someone who'd been there, who'd seen the results, confirmed that certain approaches were worth exploring. But the case against Nazi time travel is equally strong. Despite decades of searching, no one has produced a working device. No complete, verified documentation. No smoking gun. The alleged SS documents describing Die Glocke come from controversial sources, primarily Polish journalist Igor Witkowski. He claims to have seen them briefly, but cannot produce originals. His credibility, while defended by some researchers, is questioned by others. The physics poses enormous challenges. Creating traversable time-like curves requires exotic matter with negative energy density material that may not exist anywhere in the universe. The energy requirements would be astronomical, far beyond what World War II technology could generate. Modern physics can barely describe time travel theoretically. Achieving it practically seems centuries away, if it's possible at all. Human psychology provides alternative explanations. Conspiracy theories serve important psychological functions, especially regarding events as traumatic as the Holocaust. Adding science fiction elements makes incomprehensible evil slightly more comprehensible. The idea that Nazis achieved something beyond normal reality paradoxically makes their normal reality industrial genocide easier to process. It's more comfortable imagining SS officers as mad scientists pursuing impossible dreams than facing that rational, educated people committed atrocities for mundane reasons like careerism and ideology. This explanation is compelling. It accounts for why these theories persist despite lack of definitive proof. Psychological needs create psychological solutions, but it doesn't explain everything. It doesn't explain why thousands of pages remain classified 80 years later. It doesn't explain physical evidence at test sites. It doesn't explain the deathbed confessions from credible witnesses. Why do files remain sealed? The National Security Agency and CIA regularly deny Freedom of Information Act requests about specific programs, citing ongoing security concerns. What from 1945 could threaten security in 2025? Several possibilities. 1. Embarrassment. The documents reveal extent of cooperation with Nazis, recruitment of war criminals, knowledge about Holocaust that wasn't acted upon. This would be politically damaging but not genuinely threatening to security. 2. Protection of sources and methods. Intelligence techniques developed during or after the war remain in use. Revealing them would compromise current operations. This is plausible for some documents but doesn't explain blanket classification. 3. Ongoing relevance. The research begun by Nazis continues in classified facilities. Revealing Nazi origins would prompt questions about current programs. Better to keep everything sealed than risk exposure of connections. This third possibility is most disturbing. It suggests knowledge recovered from Silesia proved valuable enough to justify continuing research despite its horrific origins. What could be that valuable? What could justify decades of secrecy, moral compromises, and studied ignorance of atrocities? Consider an alternative interpretation. The Nazis didn't achieve time travel, but discovered something dangerous while attempting it. Powerful electromagnetic fields affecting consciousness, creating hallucinations of temporal displacement. Exotic radiation causing organic matter to decay rapidly. Quantum effects at macroscopic scales producing unpredictable results. These effects, while not time travel, would still be weapons worthy of continued classification and secret study. This interpretation explains much. It accounts for witness testimony they experienced real phenomena, just not time travel. It explains continued classification. Any breakthrough in electromagnetic consciousness manipulation would be strategically valuable. It justifies recruiting German scientists. Their research, even failing its stated goal, yielded useful knowledge. And it suggests why governments remain secretive, admitting they continued Nazi research trajectories, even for different purposes, is politically impossible. Better to classify everything and maintain the fiction that nothing useful was recovered. This is the skeptical position. It acknowledges something occurred but disputes the extraordinary claims. But here's what this interpretation struggles to explain: the specific descriptions of temporal effects, clocks running at different rates, sensations of moving through moments, visions of other times. Are these embellishments added to prosaic electromagnetic research? Hallucinations from exposure to fields? or descriptions of something real that we lack framework to understand? The persistence of Nazi escape theories connects to time travel speculation. If high-ranking Nazis escaped to Argentina or Antarctica with advanced technology, they could have continued research in isolation. The German communities in Bariloche included engineers, scientists, SS officers. With secret funding, Nazi gold, looted diamonds, intelligence service payments, they could have maintained research programs for years. Isolated bases in Patagonia's wilderness or Antarctica's interior could conceal much. These regions remain largely unexplored even today. Facilities built there in 1945 might still exist, abandoned or occupied. This sounds like fiction. Yet we know Eichmann lived openly in Buenos Aires for 15 years. Mengele lived comfortably in South America for 34 years. If they escaped and survived, why not others? And if others escaped with knowledge and materials from Silesian facilities, what might they have achieved given time and resources? Perhaps nothing. Perhaps the research was dead-end, requiring industrial infrastructure that isolated refuges couldn't provide. Or perhaps something. Perhaps research continued quietly, producing results that were sold or traded to intelligence services. Knowledge is currency. Nazi scientists traded it for protection, for funding, for new identities. What knowledge did they trade? What did they achieve before dying or being captured? The modern implications are perhaps most disturbing. If Nazi research produced anything valuable, where is that technology now? In American hands, incorporated into black projects at facilities like Area 51, the continued classification suggests ongoing programs that trace lineage to recovered German research. In Russian hands, explaining their claims about psychotronic weapons and consciousness manipulation. Soviet archives remain largely sealed. What did they recover from Silesia that shaped their research directions? Or still in neo-Nazi hands, hidden in South American bunkers or Antarctic bases, waiting for political conditions favorable to emergence? Each possibility has different nightmare implications. But all share common thread. The knowledge didn't die with the Reich. It survived, metastasized, continued. And it continues still, in facilities you'll never visit, pursuing questions that official science denies are worth asking. Some researchers suggest the evidence points to an even stranger conclusion. The Nazis achieved limited success, creating temporal anomalies or instabilities they couldn't fully control. These anomalies persist, explaining ongoing UFO sightings, time distortion reports near certain locations, and electromagnetic anomalies detected worldwide. According to this theory, Die Glocke didn't create stable time machines but punched holes in space-time that never fully healed. The experiments released something exotic particles, temporal ripples, dimensional breaches that continues affecting our reality in ways we barely detect. This theory is speculative, even by conspiracy standards. Yet it addresses puzzling aspects other theories miss. Why would governments worldwide cooperate to hide information? Because the problem is shared. Everyone faces consequences of Nazi experiments gone wrong. Why do anomalies persist decades later? Because they're self-sustaining effects in space-time fabric, not dependent on original equipment. Why can't we replicate the technology? Because it was never controlled technology but catastrophic accident, whose conditions we don't fully understand and are terrified to recreate. This sounds insane, but quantum mechanics demonstrates reality is stranger than common sense suggests. Particles affect each other instantaneously across arbitrary distances. Observation changes. What's observed retroactively? The universe is fundamentally non-local and acausal. If space-time can be bent, warped, and curved, Einstein proved it, can then sufficiently powerful forces might damage it, create scars, weak points, tears, and those damage points might persist, causing observable effects that seem impossible but are merely improbable. Or perhaps the simplest explanation is correct. The Nazis pursued time travel desperately, consumed massive resources, killed countless people in experiments, achieved nothing except verifying that time travel is impossible, and the continued secrecy merely conceals moral horror that intelligence agencies recruited men who committed atrocities for knowledge that proved worthless. The tragedy isn't that they succeeded. The tragedy is that they tried. That human beings were murdered not even for strategic advantage but for impossible dreams based on mystical delusions. This explanation has virtue of simplicity. It requires no exotic physics, no ongoing conspiracies, no hidden technologies. Just bureaucratic inertia, embarrassment about recruited Nazis, and reluctance to admit how little we actually recovered. Yet, even this explanation leaves the nagging feeling that something remains hidden. The pattern of evidence documents withheld, witnesses threatened, physical anomalies unexplained suggests more than bureaucratic inertia. It suggests active concealment of something specific. What that something might be remains the final unanswered question. As sleep pulls you down into darkness, consider, what if the greatest secret isn't about the past but the future? What if Die Glocke didn't let Nazis change history, but let them see what was coming, and what they saw terrified them enough to risk everything trying to prevent it? What if the reason governments keep secrets isn't to hide Nazi success or failure, but to hide what any temporal viewing device would reveal about our own future? What if they saw the coming disasters, environmental collapse, nuclear, war, AI transcendence, extinction events, and realized nothing they did would prevent them? What if they discovered that time is a closed loop, that future horror is inevitable, and past attempts to prevent it have always failed? That would explain the desperate escalation of experiments in war's final months. Not trying to win the war, trying to escape what comes after. Not seeking weapons to defeat enemies, but seeking escape from destiny itself. And that would explain why the research continues. Because whoever controls temporal viewing capability knows what's coming. They can prepare, advantage themselves, ensure their survival, while others face extinction unknowing. Or perhaps there's no viewing capability. Perhaps the Nazis achieved nothing but demonstrated that certain questions are worth pursuing. And modern governments continue pursuing them because the payoff, if it exists, would be infinite. What if the experiments continue in bunkers beneath Nevada or the Antarctic ice because we're trapped in the same desperate logic that drove the Nazis? Racing toward catastrophe. Hoping technology provides escape, willing to commit any atrocity, overlook any horror, pursue any avenue if there's even fractional chance of transcending physical limitations. The Nazis believed will could overcome reality, that destiny was real, that Aryans had cosmic significance justifying any sacrifice. We like to think we're different, we're rational, empirical, ethical. We don't believe in destiny or mysticism or racial superiority, but we continue their research, we recruit their scientists, we pursue their questions through different terminology. Perhaps we're not so different after all. Perhaps the only difference is that we're slightly more subtle about sacrificing ethics for power. Or what if, as you drift toward sleep, time itself becomes more fluid? What if consciousness loosening from waking state allows access to what technology cannot? Visions of other moments, other choices, other timelines where different decisions led to different worlds. The ancients believed this. Medieval mystics experienced it. Renaissance geniuses documented it. Nazi scientists tried to induce it artificially, and perhaps they succeeded. Perhaps they proved scientifically what mystics knew intuitively. Consciousness itself is the time machine, not traveling physically through time that may be impossible, but consciousness accessing information across temporal boundaries, viewing past events, sensing future possibilities, influencing probability through observation before quantum collapse. If this is true, then every sleeping mind enters territory the Nazis died trying to map. Every dream potentially accesses information across time. Every intuition might be temporal sensing, and perhaps that's why you sometimes wake knowing things you shouldn't know. Not because you're psychic, not because of mystical gifts, but because consciousness, freed from waking constraints, naturally accesses information across temporal dimensions. The Nazis tried to weaponize this, build technology that amplified it, controlled it, aimed it. Did they succeed? The evidence is ambiguous. The classification is absolute. The truth remains hidden. Sleep comes now. Time dissolves. Past, present, and future blur together into eternal moment. In this state, questions matter more than answers. Mystery matters more than certainty. The unknown matters more than the known. The Nazis pursued time travel and perhaps achieved something. Perhaps nothing. Perhaps something worse than nothing, knowledge that should have stayed hidden, doors that should have stayed closed, questions that should never have been asked. 80 years later, we're left with fragments, testimonies, classified documents, and persistent feeling that official history omits something crucial. Perhaps because there's nothing to omit. Perhaps the mystery is all surface, no depth. Perhaps the questions have no answers because nothing actually occurred. Or perhaps because what occurred is too dangerous to acknowledge, too valuable to reveal, too terrible to face. The past is ahead of you, the future is behind you. And right now, in this moment between waking and sleeping, you exist in all of them simultaneously. Just like the gods the ancients described, just like the mystical states medieval texts documented, just like the temporal awareness Nazis believed was Aryan birthright, just like, perhaps, the experimenters in Silesian chambers achieved before dying from exposure to their own discoveries. The questions remain. They'll remain when you wake if you wake, and they'll return when you sleep again tomorrow night. Did the Nazis achieve time travel? Are we still pursuing their research? Does consciousness naturally transcend temporal flow? Is the future already written, or still being composed? These questions have no definitive answers, only evidence that points in multiple directions, only fragments that suggest without confirming, only mysteries that deepen rather than resolve. And perhaps that's appropriate. Perhaps some questions aren't meant to be answered. Perhaps the pursuit matters more than the destination. Perhaps uncertainty is the natural state of profound truth. One final thought before darkness claims you completely. What if everything you've heard tonight is true? What if the Nazis achieved temporal viewing? What if consciousness can access other moments? What if time is more fluid than physics admits? Then every night, when you sleep, you enter that impossible territory. You become, briefly, what the Nazis tried to create artificially, a consciousness freed from temporal flow, accessing information across moments, perceiving possibilities beyond linear time. And perhaps that's why these stories resonate so deeply, not because they're historically accurate, though elements are documented fact, but because they touch something you experience nightly but forget upon waking. They remind you that time is strange, consciousness is stranger, and the boundary between impossible and merely unknown is thinner than textbooks admit. Sweet dreams, traveller through darkness. May you wake remembering everything, or nothing at all. The questions will still be here, waiting in the shadows, when consciousness returns to its temporal prison and waking life begins again. But for now, drift. Let go. Sink into that eternal present where all moments exist at once, where the Nazis still experiment in mountain laboratories, where prisoners still die for impossible dreams, where knowledge still waits, buried in classified archives and sealed minds and collective unconsciousness, where questions multiply endlessly, spawning new questions, creating infinite regress of mystery, where, perhaps, you'll find answers that can only be accessed when consciousness breaks free from time's tyranny. Or perhaps you'll find only more questions. Either way, you'll return to waking world changed by the journey, carrying fragments of something glimpsed but not fully grasped. And tomorrow night, you'll travel again, searching for answers to questions that have no answers. Searching for truth about the Nazis and time and consciousness and the strange territories where they intersect. Searching, always searching, through darkness that has no end. Sleep now. The questions will still be here when you wake. They'll always be here, waiting in the dark.